because at some point there's going to be some threshold. It's going to be way easier just to hit somebody, body somebody up with the ball than win the point in other ways. What do you think of these full sends?
It's just unavoidable. You know, I think that there's no reason to, you know, I think the question of is it the right thing or the wrong thing isn't even the right question. It's the right question is, you know, the paddle power should probably go down a little bit. You know, if you look at the top male pros, none of us are using full foam paddles. And I think the reason for that is right now full foam has a ton of potential. But where it is right now, I think the best playing paddle, in my opinion, it's any you know, that Gen 3 style. I like the feeling of honeycomb.
Do you think there's a paddle type that's better for amateurs or lower level players?
Yeah, I think wide bodies are better for amateur players that are getting started.
Do you think pros are slowing down paddle innovation?
You know, and pros' priorities, they don't care about durability because they're getting unlimited paddles.
All right, well, I'm here with James Ignatowich. I'm excited that you are in the studio with me. You made this happen. A lot of times it's so much easier just to phone in and get a video conference going, but I feel like the face-to-face is just so much better content.
I think it's a lot better. I mean, I think it's also cool for me to see the lab, to see all the paddles, you know. If anybody at home was curious, you know, is Johnkew legit? Does he have all these paddles? He's more than legit. I couldn't be, you know, more just not only just impressed, but just shocked at the level of attention to detail and everything that goes into it. So I've had a super fun time.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm always surprised because I am working out of a basement, and I'm always surprised when people are kind of impressed with what's going on down here. I mean, there's real stuff going on, but it is a basement, you know, and it's kind of messy down here. But yeah, small little studio. But yeah, it's awesome that you see what's going on behind the scenes. So.
Yep.
I'm really actually stoked to get this interview going because you are one of the only pros, if not the only pro, who can speak candidly about paddles because you're not bound to a contract with a paddle company, right? And not that we're not gonna bash any companies or anything, but you can like give props to other paddles and you can speak honestly about what you see in the paddle landscape.
Yep.
I think there's a big appetite for that because pros are at the top of the game. But everybody also knows that if a pro is bound to a contract and they're getting paid from a paddle company, they can't speak freely about paddles in general.
That's true. Yeah, there's almost no pros that can because you're either, if you're a pro that wants to speak freely about it, or maybe that you technically could because you're a free agent, well, you're also thinking, well, I better not say anything negative at all about any company. Not that I'm going to do that, but it's, you're kind of, on thin ice or you're walking on eggshells. But for me, I'm my own sponsor, so to speak, so I can kind of say anything.
Yeah. No, I love it. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't introduce you. I'm sure everybody who's watching knows, but James Ignatowich, top 10 pro, known for inventing the two-handed backhand dink and like unnatural power on the court. I don't know how I witnessed it last night, as your partner and on the receiving end. It's just like the ball moves at a different level when you hit it. And interesting interviews when you get gold medals.
Yeah,
You're
that's
also
for
known
sure.
for that. So.
Yeah, I am for that.
So let's get into it. And this is going to be mostly paddle based. That's my jam, right? And most of the viewers are interested in the gear space. And you are now officially a paddle nerd.
I am, definitely.
Walk us through the journey. Where were you a couple of years with regard to your knowledge of paddles and what got you onto wanting to know and this insatiable appetite you have about paddle technology and performance?
Yeah, so I spent a couple years kind of frustrated with my equipment. I didn't really love the paddle that I was using. And I also was always somebody that was super interested in what was going on behind, the scenes or under the hood. Like, how do you make this paddle better? I always felt like I could give good feedback, and I wasn't really given the opportunity to maybe give a lot of feedback and create my own paddle. And so at the beginning of this, probably a little over a year ago, I wasn't really trying to make my own company. I was just experimenting because I was bored. I had nothing else to do. And I had, a couple friends that were really big into paddle, or actually one friend particularly, Jared Cohen, who's super big into paddles and kind of just is generally in the know. And I would be like, hey, how do we make a better paddle? So then I picked another friend of mine, Marwan, and we just who's now the co-founder of RPM, Marwan, and we just got together and we said, okay, how are we going to make as good of a paddle as possible So we learned everything about, just the materials behind it, the little material science that kind of goes into it. There's another guy to give credit to, the pickleball scientist that lives in South Florida. He calls himself the pickleball scientist, and he does all these different, testing, different tests on face sheet stiffness or throat stiffness, every single thing you could possibly kind of test with a paddle. And we all just got together and just nerded out for a really long time. I mean, I spent 6 hours a day, learning everything I could about paddles, watching all the podcasts. I've seen all your podcasts. I watch all the, Pickleball Pursuit podcasts, Chris Olson, everything.
That's not a small ask, man. We put out a lot of content.
I know, you definitely do. Yeah.
At what speed were you watching these podcasts?
1.25.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with Chris Olson, I like to go normal because at 1.25, his voice becomes unbearably high. But, outside, I love Chris. But yeah, so I learned everything I possibly could and then eventually started getting prototypes. Oh. And I got prototypes that I, at first was like, okay, I hate this because I was always super picky about paddles. I was the pickiest person ever. And I didn't like any of our first 20 prototypes. And then we started experimenting with different things, learning different things. Like, okay, maybe, first thing I learned was, okay, you don't glue the foam to the honeycomb. You want to have separation there. That's where the floating core, one of the things, and learning all that type of stuff. And then eventually our 50th prototype came back really good. So we got 50 of them. And then at that point, I had all the pros in Florida try the paddle. Everybody wanted to kind of see. And I was like, look, guys, just tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what you don't like about it, because I just want to make it perfect.
Right.
And then eventually everybody was like, we love this thing. So then I started to say, okay, maybe we have to make a company and sell this thing. Maybe I'll just use this. I'm going to contract's up in August. I have 4 months to start a company.
Yeah.
So then I took that 4 months and started RPM.
That's awesome. So to go back to one of the things you mentioned, just for the people that don't know, why don't you glue the foam to the polypropylene?
Yeah, so it's funny. So if you think about it this way, take a look at the 3S. So the 3S, the foam is glued, from my understanding. And then so what happens is it'll be stiff right out of the box. And the 3S plays great. I love the 3S, but out of the box it'll be a little stiff and then it'll start to break in. And that breaking in process, a lot of it has to do with the foam separating from the glue. But if you play with a Pro 4, for example, right out of the box, I feel like the Pro 4 plays pretty good out of the box. It's never that stiff. And I think one of the reasons for that is the foam isn't glued. So there is no separation that's happening. And of course, the Pro 4 will break in a different way, though. It'll break in because the honeycomb will start to soften and crush. But yeah, that's I think the main reason.
Yeah, I think still a lot of paddle companies aren't aware of that. And
should we not give him this info? Should I not help him?
Proprietary information. I'll just cut it out.
No, you don't have to cut it out.
But yeah, I mean, if you look at the current full foam paddles, especially that are playing very well, they also have that separation between the center foam and the outer foam, EVA foam band. But yeah, with polypropylene and full foam, if you have an EVA band around it and it's touching the polypropylene, it's basically going to break in. And can be a good thing or a bad thing. Usually people don't want their paddle to play hugely different from the one they buy or have to break it in before they like it. So yeah, it's basically a way of pre-breaking in a paddle, and it's more stable that way if you do separate, which is counterintuitive. I remember seeing some of the first Yolas when I dissected them that had the separation, and I was like, is this a mistake? Is this a QC? But yeah, it was something that I'm sure they were aware of. So
yeah, and I mean, my personal favorite full foam paddle that I've tried is the Honolulu, the most recent one, and they've got the, they don't actually do it in a diving board style. They have it's hard to explain how they have it. We could probably pull up a picture of it, but it's not glued. You can just take it right out.
Yeah,
I watched that dissection. Pickleball medicine.
Yeah,
he dissected it. He's great.
Shout out to Dustin.
Yep.
We all love his dissections. Yeah. So you explained perfectly well why you wanted to start your own paddle company. I mean, are you happy with where you're at, and what's your vision kind of moving forward with RPM?
Yeah, I mean, I was never really super vision focused throughout the entirety of this, and I'm starting to kind of say, okay, I guess we have to have a vision because we're selling a lot of paddles now and things are starting to make sense financially. But for me, it was never about vision or anything. It was just like every day I was just having so much fun, and I still am. I mean, this is easily the most fun I've ever had, and I'm having way more fun with this than playing professionally, because playing professionally is fun, but there's not as much variance and there's not as much that you learn. Like how much better can I get at pickleball? I can get a little better, and you're doing the same things though every weekend in pickleball or in making a paddle company. It's like everything I'm learning is additive to what I just learned. It's like I'm growing every day, and I'm learning more things that I can apply to future businesses. Like I'm having so much fun just learning about how to make and run a business, and so let alone the paddle side of things. Like we're working on the full foam, we're working on a bunch of different things, and it's just a ton of fun. So do I have I guess my vision for the future is I'd love to see RPM be a top 5 company in pickleball. But for the most part, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to keep having a ton of fun. And if I'm not playing pickleball, I'm spending every hour of my day just working on the company.
Yeah.
Like I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about the company, and then I go practice for a couple hours, then I'm back to thinking about the company, and I go to bed, I'm thinking about the company.
No, I love it. I love the passion. And by the way, this bears repeating because you mentioned it before we pressed record, but you mentioned you're not here to do an advertisement for RPM. So I'm just thinking right now, people hearing this, hearing the owner of the company talk about it, might be thinking, wait, what's going on here?
Well, I just shouted out Honolulu.
You just shouted out Honolulu, yeah. So yeah, you're here because of this is going to be an interview based on your love of paddles, because that's my love also. So yeah, this is not.
And also, I mean, I've seen other paddle companies get like quote unquote interviewed by paddle reviewers, and it looks like an infomercial.
Oh yeah,
I don't like that. I mean, I'm not going to be that guy. So
people spot that immediately, and yeah, that's not why we're here. But I will say, paddles hit nice. Yeah, I hit with your. You sent a couple last week. I hit around with them. Yeah, for the people that don't know, they're built similar to the Yolas, propulsion core, with the foam band around a diving board platform of polypropylene, right? But there's some differences, and yeah, I was hitting with them last night, and I was telling you, normally I'm not a 14 millimeter thinner fan, but I actually did prefer that 14 mil over the 16 mil, and they both played great. Similar to the Yolas, but they have their own personality too. I'd say both of them are a little denser, less hollow feeling than the Yolas, and I feel like I need more time to dial this in, but I feel like the firepower is a notch above the Yolas. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just for a quick context on that. I mean, it's super similar to the Pro 4, but it is, a little different in that we've got a little more foam at the throat. So one of the things that I think the throat foam, or the TFP foam as they call it with Yola, did is it decreased the throat stiffness, so it makes the paddle flex more. Okay. And I think that helps. I mean, but just like you said, there's actually the PBCOR formula sort of factors in a little bit of that throat flexion. With a lot of people don't know. They think that if you take the paddle, we're getting pretty nerdy right here, but
go all nerdy.
Yeah, so basically with the PBCOR test, people probably know how that works. You take the paddle, and then it's clamped. And we've got a bunch of videos of it. Paddle's clamped, ball is shot at the paddle, and then it comes back off. I was thinking there's no way that a coefficient of restitution test is going to take into account throat flexion, but actually it does take that into account.
Well, it does. It measures. So there are a couple of corrections in the PBCOR formula that measure where it hits along the face, which relates more to the pivot point, and then also the swing weight or MOI of it, which other things being equal, an equal head speed for the paddle should produce an equal outbound speed. But we got into this a little on the last podcast, and one of the curiosities with PBCOR is that when you add lead or tungsten to the perimeter of your paddle, it does not typically change the PBCOR score. Yeah. And the reason is that yes, you add mass to a paddle. If you're swinging with the same paddle speed, it's going to increase the outbound velocity, right? It's just physics, right? But what it's calculating for, and this gets back to your point that there are corrections in the formula, is you can't swing a paddle that's heavier as fast, so the paddle speed slows down. And what we're noticing on the court is, when you let up a paddle, if you let it up to, let's say, 11 ounces, something kind of crazy, you're getting a ton of power from the baseline with the big swings you can wind up on, because you can achieve that fast paddle speed, paddle head speed. But if you get up at the kitchen, you're actually losing some of that pop, because you're not going to be able to do these wristy flicks as quickly and get the paddle from 0 to max speed as quickly with all that weight. So there's a balance with that, and the PBCOR formula does correct for that. So a lot of corrections in that formula. It's not perfect by any means, and what we're seeing, we can get into this later if you want in more detail, but what we're seeing in terms of the frustrations with the regulatory side of things is that it's not a perfect system yet, and we're trying to certify paddles based on 3 or 4 decimals, to the right of the decimal point, which is extremely accurate. And the question is, do we have the methodology? Yes, the PBCOR formula is sound. It comes from baseball, but there are also correction factors that need to go into that, as well as the methodology. 50 mile an hour inbound, 45, 55. Do we know the best inbound? 60. Do we know the best ball to use? Do we know if the ball's changed the PBCOR results? We control as many variables as possible. This is a climate-controlled basement too, so we're shooting it at 50% humidity and 70 degrees Fahrenheit and all that. But still, I think it's still young, and I think I love it that the agencies are using this now because it's so far the best way to control power. But regardless, there's still a lot of unknowns, which is that's what I'm loving right now about my job is just trying to figure it out, these unknowns.
And speaking of unknowns, I thought I was learning almost everything there was to learn about the PBCOR formula. But one thing that I learned today, which was pretty cool, was that the tightness at which you clamp the paddle at that, 2 inches and 5 centimeters, 5 millimeters from the butt cap, that tightness has no impact on the PBCOR result. And so, which is interesting to me because me and pickleball scientists, shout out to Phil, we were looking at how vibration dampening impacts PBCOR results and how that actually plays a pretty big role, at least from what we could tell. And that, if paddles have a certain amount of vibration dampening, you can use that as an indicator of whether or not they'll pass sometimes.
Interesting.
But then we realized that, just like what I'm learning today is that if there's, for example, if you're really squeezing it, just like what USAP said, where they clamp the shit out of it. I don't know if we can say that, but if you're really squeezing it, it doesn't have an impact versus if you're barely squeezing the paddle when you clamp it during the PBCOR test, because that vibration, it's coming off the paddle so fast that it doesn't have any time to come back. So it doesn't actually impact how quickly the ball comes off the paddle.
Exactly.
So, which is crazy. I mean, I think we're learning, there's so much more to be learned about this. I think we're probably a couple of years away from maybe developing a new test or, just like what you said. I mean, like, for example, in golf, they take, the ball is already sitting there, the ball is stationary, and then they do, swing speed, and then they determine how fast it comes off. But in pickleball, there's two variables because it technically, the perfect test, like what we talked about, which would cost, $100,000, and it would be like impossible to get. If you want to paddle certified, you're not going to pay $2,000 for it anymore. You're going to pay $50,000 for it. Right. That test would be a lot tougher to control because you need a ball coming inbound to simulate what happens in pickleball, and you would need a robot arm swinging it at a certain pace. And to control that and make it perfect every time, I don't think we're there yet.
No.
But to be, one of the things though is there is more money coming into pickleball. Maybe the governing bodies, I would imagine it's going to be the UPA. I don't think it'll be the USAP that does that, but maybe the UPA, that is, will find a way to take an AI robot arm and then swing it at the exact same speed, and then the inbound speed is the exact same, and then you get a better measure of maybe the plow through.
Right.
Because pop is a little different from plow through, and just like what we talked about, and I was somebody who thought, well, this PBCOR test, it's inbound velocity 50 with UPA. Inbound velocity 50, it's coming off, feels like more of a measure of pop than power.
Right.
I thought it was almost all pop. Turns out it's not. It's power, pop, maybe slightly leaning towards pop, like what you said. But I think maybe it'd be something in the future where you have that test to measure the pop, or maybe you do it at a lower pace or something like that. But then you actually said that if you do it at a lower pace, then it's all out of the window.
Yeah.
So you could even maybe talk about that. Like what happens if you shoot it at 40 or 30?
Yeah. I mean, so much of my early research with the Canon was trying to figure out the inbound speed and how that affects the PBCOR score. So USAP uses 60 miles an hour inbound. UPAA uses 50 miles an hour inbound. And I've done both, and I've done the Franklin ball without holes, and now I'm on to the Lifetime ball with holes. But you'll see at 60 and 50 miles an hour, they give a pretty good indication of where reality of the paddle power, if you know how the paddle hits, lies, right? They line up pretty well. I do feel like 50 is a better inbound speed. Things line up a little bit better than they do at 60 miles an hour, in my opinion. But once you get down to 45 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, down to 20 miles an hour, which is about the slowest inbound speed you can shoot and still get the ball to bounce off enough to pass back through the gate, it's incomprehensible. Like they line up in odd ways, and I thought maybe at the lower inbound speeds we're getting all pop, and you line up according to if you go to my database, you can sort by pop, which I'm measuring by dropping the ball with an arm extended and doing a punch volley, right, and then measuring the speed with a radar gun. The results of these lower speeds do not line up in any way with my pop results. So it's a curiosity. I'm sure it's providing some data, but there's something else going on in there that as yet I cannot make sense out of. So right now I'm on 50 miles an hour inbound, which when you kind of account for the balls coming off like in the teens, the outbound, if you shoot it at 50 miles an hour inbound, the outbound is going to be 14 to 18 miles an hour, right? Yep. If you add those two together, that's kind of like a heavy serve, right? And it's in the 50 to 60 mile an hour range. So or even above 60. So it is getting some power in there, but there's also some pop signature in there as well. So
Yep.
yes.
It's kind of funny.
We're going deep, James, already. People are already like, man, like I did not expect this interview to go so deep. But
one thing I really quickly, because I do think this is kind of cool. It's like that, and we can cut this out if this is too much nerdiness or whatever. But I think it's interesting how I feel like we almost Pickleball as a whole and the governing bodies that were doing the testing, it's like an imperfect test, but we kind of got a little lucky in that if you shoot it at 50 or 60, that is, you have a somewhat realistic representation of the power. And it doesn't feel perfect, obviously.
Right.
But it's like, look, we have this and it's kind of close and you know, things line up to a certain extent. I mean, you know, obviously, for example, the Pro 4 is going to, from what you can tell on the court, you think it's a little more powerful than the results might indicate, you know, PBCOR wise.
Right.
And then you're a little surprised to find that, like, you know, I mean, for me personally, if I'm going to hit an overhead with a black ace that failed last year, maybe even the year before, I feel like I could hit an overhead with a Pro 4 harder.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, that's maybe, you know, ties back into the concept of plow through when you really just load up and hit it as hard as you can. So, you know, the PBCOR test doesn't take those minute details into account.
Yeah.
But I think for where we're at right now, it's I think it's about as good as we could probably ask for.
Yeah, and to tie a bow on this PBCOR discussion, something I think that our current methodology with PBCOR is not capturing is, like you said, the plow through aspect. And you know, we were geeking out before we pressed record on this whole robot arm thing. And yeah, there's more variables with Pickleball, and I don't think we can. I think it'll be a lot more accurate, like you said, to have an inbound ball coming at X miles an hour and a robot arm swinging, and to get the accuracy to hit that paddle, the ball paddle collision at different inches on the paddle and with exactly the same paddle head speed and exactly the same inbound speed is mind-boggling. I'm sure it could be done, but you're right, it'd be like $100,000 to certify a paddle. Yeah. But then you'd also have to wonder, okay, what's the arc, right? Does that start at your shoulder? So are we doing a shoulder swing? Are we doing an elbow swing?
And how tall is this person?
A wristy spin. Yeah, and that's going to affect pop and power and all these things. So it's mind-boggling. Once you start increasing variables, there's an exponential like curve in terms of the number of things you have to control after that. But I do think that with the current methodology, which is eliminating as many variables as possible, and I think it's a sound methodology, but when you hit it at 2 inches from the top of a paddle, which is not typically the sweet spot of a paddle, but you can very much still generate a lot of power here, especially if you have an elongated paddle and you have a long arm, right? With that extra whip you're getting, and the leverage you're getting with the long handle, et cetera, you can really put a ball away or hit a heavy serve, a heavy drive at 2 inches from the top. And what we're seeing with the paddle clamped at 2 inches from the base, shooting it at 2 miles an hour, oftentimes the ball pushes the paddle so much that the ball has a hard time getting back through the gate. And when it does come back through the gate, it's very low speed. So we're finding the lowest PBCOR results at 2 inches. Sometimes at 3 inches, that's the performance spot, but rarely 4 inches is typically the performance spot. And it goes all the way down to 8 inches, which I think is that's one issue with the PBCOR formula. I think, you know, capturing the plow through, the paddle's swing speed, head spin, like the paddle swing path and mechanics of swinging a paddle, it doesn't do that yet. Also, should we be telling paddle companies, no, your paddle failed because the PBCOR failed at 8 inches, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, even if that is the hottest spot of the paddle, in reality, you're not going to be like actually gaining any advantage from hitting a paddle down at 8 inches from the tip.
Yeah, and I mean, another cool thing too so this is something that I was talking to Lisa with PPL about, Pickle Pro Labs, that is, and that's who does the UPA testing.
She's great.
She's the best.
She's a great person.
And one of the things that was interesting for me was, so she was saying that with a lot of Gen 3 paddles, and I think that it was also Matt who had said this, that from their testing, and then your testing doesn't indicate this from what you said, but from their testing, sometimes the impact location, you know, where you get the highest PBCOR result will go up when they do ABI. Mm-hmm. And so we did our test, we did R&D with PPL, we got our test results back, and we found that the ABI number, actually, and this is crazy, and I don't know if this is just like a weird situation, but our highest ABI number was at the 2-inch impact location on one of our paddles.
Wow, okay.
And so I'll show it to you. I forgot to tell you that, and it's like, so, you know, you don't know where that comes from or why that happens, but it did seem to be a common theme that the ABI would actually be higher at higher points in the paddle. And another thing too, like just from my own personal subjective experiences, with a paddle that starts to break in and break in and break in, if it's Gen 3 style with full foam, it's probably a little bit different. But especially with the if it has the diving board style of foam on the top 2/3 of the paddle, they call it like the diving board construction.
Right.
I found that as you break it in, the sweet spot goes up a little bit with elongated paddles. And I maybe am just making that up. That's just how I feel.
Yeah.
And then it was crazy to see though that the testing results actually supported that.
So for those that don't know, ABI is the accelerated break-in. So they're doing some tests at PPL to break in a paddle and then retest it. And that's really interesting that one of your paddles came in after ABI. The performance spot moved up to 2 inches.
The highest. And I'll show
crazy.
it to you. I was shocked too. I was like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
But I think I brought that up also with the pickleball scientist, and he was like, doesn't make sense. So I don't know. We don't have an answer for that.
Well, cool. Yeah. So we also shot some content this morning with the ball cannon, so we'll each publish some of that. But let's move on to just in general paddle regulations. So, I mean, where do you stand on limiting power? And do you feel like it's a good thing to limit power? Should we just let paddle companies innovate and get the most powerful paddle and turn it into rackets? And if you do think that power should be limited, where do you think it should be limited at?
Yeah, so I think for some context on that, I like to go based on UPA certification. I think that there's a little more comprehensive. They're using a ball that has holes, not like and I mean nothing against the USAP. If I'm going to focus on one, I'll focus on them for now because I also appreciate that they're doing the accelerated break-in testing. I think that's super key because if you're not testing for break-in, then I could tune up a paddle that'll test at 0.43 and then it'll be perfect, and then I'll tune it up so that it's gonna have a ton of glued foam, right, and it's gonna break in like a machine gun. And then so obviously not trying to give any paddle companies any funny ideas, but that's definitely something that I think could either way. So UPA, I think, will go based off that. And so right now they're at 0.385 is the PEF, which is the paddle efficiency factor, which is their term or their version of PBCOR. And so 0.385 is what it can be new. And then it can break into 0.405. So that's pretty close. And honestly, I mean, if you look at the Pro 4, for example, I don't know where your testing results put it at, but I would guess it's new. A new Pro 4 is probably 0.34, 35. It's not that high. So anyway, I would say right now, if I were to have my own personal, like, okay, I'm now Jason Aspis, this is my decision, I would say you do want to allow for a little bit of break-in. And there was some discussion about potentially, 0.385 and 0.385, meaning that it's got to be new at 0.385 and broken in at 0.385. I talked to Jason about it. They were thinking about it. They've recently rolled that back because there was a ton of issues with the most recent switch because you've had, for example, the Proton Flamingo is no longer UPA approved. The Paddle Tech 12.7 was no longer UPA approved. You saw that whole paddle fiasco on September 1st.
Right.
And I could give some context on that too, or maybe not.
Yeah, I think people are interested for sure.
Yeah, so basically it's as simple as starting on September 1st, the RPM limit, so before that it was 2,200, and then starting on September 1st it was 2,100, and there were some paddles that fell into that range, but also the paddles weren't allowed to break into as much power. They weren't allowed to have as much power. I think it was by like a 0.2, pretty small amount. Okay. But those paddles, so for example, the Flamingo was delisted, still USAP approved, so nothing against them, but Paddle Tech, and there was a bunch. I won't call out the paddle companies, but there was a bunch of paddles that, and then you saw all the pros were using Pro 4s. Even the 16 millimeter Colin Johns Pro 4 widebody was no longer approved, which kind of ties back into what we were talking about before, which is that wide bodies will actually oftentimes have a higher PBCOR result, which you said maybe because they're a little more poppy.
Yeah.
So, but anyway.
Which is counterintuitive because most people associate, the longer paddles with more aggressive players and being able to put the ball away, which is true, right? To an extent, but so there's some pop issues in there for sure.
Yeah, and it's weird because I would think the same thing if I were just thinking about it. Like, elongated paddle definitely should have more higher PBCOR result. Yeah. But so if I had a choice, back to because I'm talking in circles, but back to why I would bring the amount down. I think it should be something where there's a limit for pro play, and then there's an entirely different limit for what you can produce. Yeah. Because if you look at, for example, baseball, they're using wooden bats, right? And then and I'm not saying we should be using wooden paddles like we're going to be using in Sacramento, but I think it would be cool and it'd be better for the product on TV if pros were using paddles that couldn't go above even maybe just try it out 0.35.
Okay.
That could be fun to try out. Right. Like that would be the lowest, anything below that, it's kind of crazy, but just give that a shot and then see what happens. And then don't limit the RPMs. I think the RPMs for the pros should be up to 2,200. So then we're talking about paddles that have a lot of spin and they don't have a ton of power potential. And then think about what those points would be. Because if you watch, if you watch men's doubles, it can get boring. You know, you'll maybe have an 80 ball dink rally, and then because I don't want to speed it up at JW if he's got a Gen 3. You know, like that's just not what I want to do.
Right.
But I mean, maybe if he's got a less powerful paddle and I've got more spin potential, so I can create a more shape, oriented speed up and do some more fun stuff with my speed ups, then maybe it gets more fun. And singles would be a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Less power, more spin. That's the definition of a fun singles match. So I think if we want to make it great on TV, you got to switch. And if you look at other pros, there are different regulations for pros versus amateurs.
Yeah. No, I like it. So lower the power a bit, raise the spin. Do you feel like there's a certain limit to spin where it does get to be too crazy and it's going to make change the game too much?
Yeah, that's why. And also, you don't want it to be too disconnected from amateur play.
Yeah.
Because then if you've got amateurs that are switching between, playing amateur tournament, they're like, oh, I'll be a pro one day, and then I've got to change to a paddle that's completely different.
Right.
That can be a problem. You also want amateurs to have the feeling like they can be pros, so they want what they're watching on TV to be somewhat similar to what they're, in some ways playing like, or they can kind of conceptualize the shots.
Right.
So if they watch pros that are using paddles that are allowed to be, 2,400 RPMs, then they're going to be like, well, I could never hit that shot. Why would I practice that shot?
Yeah.
So you want it to be maybe different, but not too disconnected.
Okay.
So I think 2,200 would be good. I mean, maybe try 2,300 for some fun tournaments. We're doing a wooden paddle tournament.
Right.
Why don't we try a 2,300 RPM tournament?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that 2,300 would break the game. I mean, I get, with my spin tests, I get 2,300 plus on the top elite paddles, and it's not like they're giving any more advantage than that 2,200. The question is, does the PPL 2,300 equate to my 2,300?
That's what I was gonna say.
It might be that their 2,300 equates to my 2,500, with the way I'm serving it or whatever. So, but regardless, I feel like you're right. Like, I know the paddles that passed at 2,200 and then failed at 2,100. I don't feel like those paddles provided a unnecessary or unfair advantage to any player at the pro or amateur levels, right? So I'd say at least keep it at 22, maybe bump it up to 2,300.
For sure. I mean, you want fun points for the pro game because I hate to say it because I'm a pro player, but pickleball is not, the most fun thing to watch. It's not like a sport where it's like, oh, that immediately lends itself to great product on TV.
Yeah.
Like if you watch the NFL right now, it's like, whoa, that's fun.
Yeah.
But if you watch a bunch of guys dinking, you say maybe we give them some more grit, make something a little more fun here. But I mean, that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, right. No, you're totally right. I remember the first, when I got into pickleball and during COVID, and I was like, wonder what the pro scene looks like. And I turned on YouTube and searched up pro pickleball. And I immediately recognized Ben Johns because he was in every video. And I was like, man, why don't they just hit the ball hard? There's these dink rallies, I had no idea what I was watching. And it's just like, so I think people coming into it new still have that feeling like, why are these four men, athletes, patty caking the ball back and forth to each other?
Yep.
But yeah, and then that limiting power I think is important. Everybody realizes that. And I mean, yeah, maybe you're right that bringing the power down a bit is going to be beneficial because at some point there's going to be some threshold. It's probably passed with some of the paddles that broke in into very illegal numbers. But it's going to be way easier just to hit somebody, body somebody up with the ball than win the point in other ways, right? And what do you think of these full sends? I think Jay DeVillier's full sending at you was the first time anybody saw like a full just like wind up and hit it as hard as you can. And then Hayden has been using that, and it's becoming more and more common. As the sport becomes more competitive, it's going to be just a natural way to win a point, right? What do you think of this?
It's just unavoidable.
Yeah.
I think that there's no reason to, I think the question of is it the right thing or the wrong thing isn't even the right question.
Yeah.
The right question is, the paddle power should probably go down a little bit, because I think it's, if you're playing for money in the competitive game, you can't expect somebody to hold off from something that'll help them win.
To be nice, right?
Yeah. There's nothing, and I mean, I've full sent it at people all the time. People full send it at me, and it's nothing personal.
Right.
I don't think any of the pros are going to take it personally. I mean, you saw what Jay DeVilliers tried to kill me, and I had no issue with it. I think, because it's also our choice whether or not we want to wear glasses. So if we want to wear eye protection, then we can. If we choose not to wear eye protection, then that's on us.
Yeah.
And there's really no other way to look at it, because if you're not wearing eye protection and then you get hit, that's a super sad thing that could happen. And there's been situations. I know Jeannie Bouchard had something happen to her eye, and it's scary. But if you're playing a competitive sport for money, then you're kind of putting yourself in the line of fire,
Right.
and you do have an option to put glasses on. And for the record too, like in practice, also with pros, we're all accurate enough to not hit each other in the face.
Yeah.
Like so in the pro practice scene in Florida, because I live in South Florida, where all the top pros are kind of condensed in that area, and they're all practicing with each other. We go for full bags, quote unquote, all the time.
Right.
You know, like Ryan in first practice, he will try to Ryan Fu, that is, he will try to hit me in the chest as hard as he possibly can. And like, but I also trust. I mean, Ryan's a great player,
Right.
so I know that he can hit me here and not my face.
Yeah.
So it's not really, nobody's that scared about it.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, let's move on to the perfect paddle. So if you could construct a perfect paddle currently, what would your favorite attributes be? So, I've got my list of metrics that I kind of judge paddles on, but yeah, it'd be good to hear from you. Like, what do you think a great playing paddle plays like?
Yeah. Well, for me, I guess it's funny because this is such a subjective thing because everybody's got their own different types of styles. And for me, my perfect paddle will definitely look a lot different than my doubles partner right now, Colin Johns.
Okay.
His partner, I mean, his of course, he's going to like the wide body because he really values playing the right side in men's doubles and he wants to get to the kitchen every single time. And he wants to be able to have compact swings on the right side of the court where you're only covering 40% of the court.
Right.
For me, it's a little different. I love the wide body, but I think I play a little better with an elongated paddle. I really like serving and returning and hitting third shots with an elongated paddle. I think that the plow through helps me a lot. And so for me, and also getting flicky and reaching out of the air and trying to still make things happen at that 2-inch impact location is something that I think is pretty key for me. So an elongated paddle does help with that.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that I like is flexion at the throat. Not as much flexion at the throat as like a paddle tech or a cold press paddle. Obviously, that's a little different. You could snap that thing at the throat, which is, if you watch, I mean, I've already said this, but yeah, if you watch like a Christian Alshon, he'll snap his paddle tech when he gets mad. It's like, well, yeah, it's cold press. It's not that hard. I mean, and either of us could do it with our left hand, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. And then it's funny because I played against Zane Ford, and he got really mad at the end, and he tried to do the same thing.
That was against you, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, dude, that thing's thermoform. You're not going to break that 6-0. And he didn't break it. It's like, so, but either way, so for me, I like some flexion at the throat. I feel like it just kind of reminds me of tennis, because a tennis racket will flex a little bit at the throat. So I like that feeling, but that's just my subjective feeling. Another thing that I like is a little bit of a higher sweet spot. I like a higher sweet spot because I feel like if I'm going to reset the ball, I'm just going to reset it near the bottom of the paddle anyway. You're using that top of the paddle to really hit aggressive shots for the most part. So I like a higher sweet spot, which is something that you kind of feel with a lot more Gen 3 paddles. I like the Gen 3 feel.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I know that foam is, we're moving in that direction. But if you look at the top male pros, none of us are using full foam paddles outside of, I think Jay was messing around with the carbon. But out of the top 20, I think it's like 1 or 0.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is right now, full foam has a ton of potential. But where it is right now, I think the best playing paddle, in my opinion, we could take the RPM out of it. It's any that Gen 3 style is just my personal opinion. I like the feeling of honeycomb, so it would have that makeup.
Gotcha. And there are a few different variations of Gen 3. So there's the full floating core, and then there's the Peninsula diving board, Yola Gen 3.
And that's for clarification, that's what I like, because I don't like the, for example, the 11.624 style, where it's all around, or the Selkirk Air Power, same exact thing, right? I personally don't like that as much because I feel like the sweet spot, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like on that type, if it's completely encompassing it, the sweet spot's a little closer to the geometric center of the paddle face.
Yeah, I haven't tested objectively, but that jives with how I feel paddle plays too. Yeah. The diving board, naturally, you would think in terms of a physicist that it's also going to, it's springier at the end of the diving board than it is further up on the diving board. And if it's floating, then it's more like a trampoline, a little trampoline where the center is where you're going to get the most boing.
Yep.
Right.
And that's what I like.
So what do you like in terms of firepower level? Do you feel like wherever power is capped, that's where you're going to want to be? Or would you ever see yourself playing with a less powerful paddle by choice?
For me personally, because I know Tyra Black was saying how she likes more of a control paddle, but I for whatever reason, I feel like the really powerful paddles that do have a lot of dwell time, that Gen 3 style, I have no problem controlling them. I like controlling those paddles, especially when they break in and the sweet spot sort of expands.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common theme among the pro players.
Yeah.
It's that if we can control it. So since I can control it, I want as much power as I can get.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
And I think we're at the spot now and with paddle technology that we are getting to a place where you can actually have sufficient control with the top tier power paddles. And up to the last 6 months, I'd say it wasn't really the case. It was always a trade-off, and a pretty big one. Like you get let's go back to like the Gearbox Pro Power paddles.
Yep.
Those are the most powerful paddles on the market, and the sweet spot was like the size of edgeless, and so you were sacrificing a ton of control versus the new Gearbox GX2 Power, which sweet spot's enormous compared to the old ones on that. It gets good spin, which helps with control. It's a consistent response across the face. So you're getting plenty of control with an elite power paddle on the modern paddles.
I'll just add this interjection too, just for context. Like the size of the sweet spot is everything for me for control. So some people equate control with just a lack of power because they feel like if it's more dead, they can control it. But for me, I can control any level, I feel personally, any level of pace. So it's just how consistent is the response or amount. So I just care about sweet spot size.
Right.
So that's all.
So you like stiff or soft paddles, plush or stiff?
I like plush, and I know that's crazy because I used a Power Air, but that was all I could use. I've always loved the plush Gen 3 feel.
Yeah.
You think back to, I remember I hit with a mod right when it first came out, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah. Those things are crazy after they broke in.
Yeah, or even
at the amateur levels, we had to suffer with those up until July. People just head hunting with those.
Yep.
Dense or hollow? What's your favorite?
I like, it's kind of in between. Okay. I like to have it's funny because I feel like I'm using the 16 millimeter, and I feel like if it breaks in, it'll feel a little more hollow in a lot of ways. But I don't really notice. I mean, dense or hollow, that's a good question. Because I used the Power Air for so long, so I don't really have a feel for like everything feels like hollow and springy to me compared to that. Right. So, I'm still kind of getting my own feel for what a real paddle is. And
I would say your RPM paddles are slightly denser than the Ola Gen 3. So you're kind of, I feel like compared to the newest full foam paddles, those are still sort of hollow feeling, the Gen 3s compared to some of the new.
All I know is, for whatever reason, I really don't like the feeling of fiberglass. And I think fiberglass is a great material, and there's definitely a use case for it, especially on full foam paddles. I mean, from what I can tell, I think with, for example, like the carbon true foam, aren't they covering their indentations with like a layer of fiberglass? Yeah. So there's a reason, there's use cases for fiberglass, but I personally just hate the harsh feeling of it. I don't know why. I feel like I just want to know where I'm putting the ball. I feel like if I can just hit a drop with 3 layers of carbon fiber, I'm going to just make it. I like it. But that's just how I feel. Yeah.
And more, I think the audible qualities of a paddle are becoming important. And so do you like a high pitch or a low pitch sound?
It's funny. So and these things aren't necessarily correlated with how much power a paddle will have.
Exactly.
But for me, I was like, okay, so I definitely, know that if somebody, an amateur player, can hear a sound that's super deep and it's a super low pitch, they're going to associate that with more power. Yeah. And I thought it'd be kind of a fun video idea for me to create 2 paddles that have the exact same PBCOR result, but find one that's got a really deep sound and one that's got a really high pitch sound, and then have them both blacked out, and then have, do 20 people and say, hey, which one do you think is more powerful, and then see how strong the placebo effect is. I would bet you that at least 15 of those people would say that the deeper sounding paddle will be more powerful. So there's definitely a use case to make your paddle sound deep for paddle companies. Yeah. Because in deep sound, they're just like, whoa, what's that sound? Like, that's cool.
Do you remember when the Franklin C45 was in its prototype phases, and Hayden came out and played with one at the PBA, and the thing sounded like so bassy, and it generated so much buzz from people like, what paddle is that? That's a crazy hot paddle. And I don't know how hot it was, but regardless, there's something to the sound of a paddle, and too many people have been bagged by delaminated paddles and disbonded paddles or core crush paddles at tournaments, and it's just like this co-association of deep sounds and a crazy hot paddle. But yeah, you're right. You can adjust the tone of a paddle and keep the power level constant.
And one thing that we found too, and you could, like if you have any insight on this, if you experimented with this, but we took different samples just for fun, because this is all just kind of fun for me, but like experimenting with the distance of the glue to the honeycomb, and the more distance there is, and you don't want too much distance because you don't want this much distance, but like, if you have a couple millimeters of separation between that edge foam and the EVA foam ring, that is, and the honeycomb, it'll give you a hollower sound. It'll give you a deeper sound. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why when a paddle breaks in, it'll start to sound deeper and deeper, because there might actually be more and more separation that happens. So we were going to try to experiment and see how much space can we actually put in between the honeycomb and the foam, just on a fun experiment paddle, to see how deep can we get this thing to sound. So that, I would imagine that Franklin C45 that Hayden had. Maybe there was, I don't know if it was quality control later, maybe there was some extra space there because it didn't seem like it was any more powerful, but it sounded like a,
sounded weird. Yeah. That's cool. What did you land on? What was the maximum space in between?
We're still working on it. We're still, it's funny. Like we were like, okay, we're going to try this much space. And this isn't production model. This is just like fun stuff. But we tried like a good, I think it was like 5 millimeters of space, and it didn't actually. It just sounded really deep, but I was still trying to feel like it didn't give me any more power.
Okay, interesting.
But
I wonder what the threshold is there with that space where eventually the paddle will start breaking in.
Yeah, the carbon fiber or something might happen. It could sink or something.
Yeah. All right, let's get into paddle shape, and within that rubric, do you think there's a paddle type that's better for amateurs or lower level players versus pro players in terms of shape, firepower, whatever metrics you want to measure that by?
Yeah, I think wide bodies are better for amateur players that are getting started.
Yeah.
Because there's a wide range of how good amateur players can be.
Right.
But I think at the 3.0 level, it makes a lot of sense to use a wide body because I also think it actually cleans up your technique. Because I think people with a wide body paddle, it's a shorter paddle in general, they're going to have, I think they're naturally going to say, okay, this feels light in my hand. I'll have some smaller swings at the net. I'm not going to take these big, massive swings.
Right.
Because I've taught a ton of clinics to like beginner players and all ranging of levels. And I found that a lot of them will take massive swings on their volleys because they just want to finish the point and they want to end the point. And that was another reason why I said, I actually think that for players that are just getting started, a more powerful paddle has its benefits for cleaning up your technique because you don't feel like you have to overswing.
Sure.
And also on drops and resets, you'll naturally make a small swing and you'll naturally do the right thing. If you have a Gen 1 paddle that's got no power, you're going to want to do some wrist, but you're not going to get away with that with a super powerful paddle.
Right.
So it's weird because you don't want them to be killing each other with these powerful paddles. But I think at a lower level, there are use cases to actually, it helps your technique. Yeah, shape-wise, I think a wide body is better for people that are getting started, but you can use whatever you want. If you played tennis, an elongated paddle feels more, comfortable for you.
Yeah.
I think that, obviously wide body paddles have a little bit of a bigger sweet spot. They've got a lower swing weight. I think that it seems like women like them a little bit more because the swing weight's lower. And the twist weight is also obviously higher, which means that you're going to have longer rallies maybe because it's not going to be twisting in your hand. You're not going to be using as much wrist.
Right.
So I think for players that are just getting started, a wide body makes a lot of sense. It's easier to get to the kitchen too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that wide bodies were less a viable option for performance paddles a couple of years ago or even a year ago, but because they were all like short handle, less power, right? And now technology has come along enough where you can get a powerful wide body paddle and have offensive capability with the broadened sweet spot.
One thing I would say about shape that I think is interesting, like that we've been experimenting with is, so there are trade-offs to a wide body paddle, obviously. And one of the trade-offs is that you might get a little bit less plow through and a little bit more pop. And there is a difference between plow through and pop.
Right.
So one of the things we found that is correlated with plow through is flexion at the throat. If you have a little more flexion, you can load up and really hit a harder overhead or a harder drive. So we were thinking maybe we make those foam blocks at the throat a little bit bigger. So we make the honeycomb structure thinner at the throat so that it flexes even more.
Okay.
And it's maybe not going to flex as much as a cold press paddle, but it's going to be close.
Right.
And I love the idea of like a really flexible throat wide body so you can get some playability aspects of an elongated paddle.
Yeah.
But you're still getting the good stuff that you get with a wide body.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I've come around almost full circle. I used to only like the stiffer unibody feel for paddles, and I really disliked certain paddles that had a lot of flex in the neck, mostly like the Selkirk 007. It just felt really bad to hit that, that paddle. But you know what? A lot of flex in the neck there, but I think more than that, it was weird vibrations coming through that paddle into your hand, and I was co-associating that with the neck flex. And I've hit other paddles now, like this new 6.0 Black Opal coming out. It has some neck flex in a great way. Like I actually appreciate that neck flexing for the plow through, like you mentioned. So.
Did you play tennis?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I feel like a lot of former tennis players really appreciate the flex in the neck.
Yeah, for sure. All right, what's the biggest mistake you see people choosing paddles? So what, do you think that there's a certain paddle that's that people jump into, like besides the Z5, like whatever for whatever reason people love buying the Z5 when they first go?
Yeah, what's the deal with that? It's so funny. You see those.
Maybe
so
it's the
often.
name. Like maybe somebody else should create a Z something paddle and see if it sells. But anyway,
The
regardless,
Onyx is a pretty cool name.
it's like Onyx, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
Onyx Z5. It sounds cool. And then you hit a ball with it. You're like, okay, I'm taking this back.
Right.
But that's a good question.
Do you see a common mistake when people are buying paddles?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I watch guys that are getting started, because I've taught so many clinics, like I said, and so I've seen so many players at all levels. I think that when male players especially are getting started, they're all buying elongated paddles. I think the ratio, especially from what we're seeing with RPM, what we're selling, it's almost 5-to-1 elongated to wide body. And that's a pretty big discrepancy. I think, and I've always been somebody that's pro wide body. I mean, one of my best friends, the guy that I taught the game to, Max Freeman, he uses a wide body. He's a top 20 player now, arguably. And I mean, I think that it shouldn't be 5-to-1. I think it should be something like, maybe 3-to-1. I mean, I know that elongateds can be a little more fun to use. You definitely want as much reach as you can get, some people will say, and they might actually look a little bit better aesthetically. I think elongateds might. But I don't know. I think people also have a tendency to not give enough credit to the hybrid shape and not give enough credit to the possibility of the Yola Agassi shape.
Yeah.
So I love that shape. I for whatever reason, and it's funny because a lot of the players that were switching to the Pro 4 at this last tournament in Cincinnati, they were all going to the Perseus, and they all wanted the Percy shape. And I was like, guys, let's try the Agassi shape. And I'm a pretty cultured paddle person. I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do to use the Agassi shape. So I used the Yola Agassi in Cincinnati just because my RPM was not yet UPA approved, and I was out of my Selkirk contract, so I'm like, I'm definitely going to go with something different. And so I tried this Yola Agassi, and it's got a little less dwell time, and I feel like the sweet spot's a little bit higher. And for whatever reason, I felt like I was getting away with more stuff.
Okay.
I felt like I didn't have to move my feet as much. I could kind of reach a little more because it's got this really high sweet spot, and I just had such a fun time playing with that shape. So I was actually curious if Yola has any sort of patent on that Agassi shape, or if I can just kind of remake it and then do my own spin on it.
Right.
Because I love that shape. It's just the only issue is people aren't buying it enough, probably because it looks so bad.
I do see a fair amount of them in the wild, those Agassiz. Not as much as the Perseus by any means, but yeah, I was surprised too. Like when we went to the YOLO event where they're launching the Pro 4s, I saw that Agassi shape and I'm like, oh no.
It looks bad. It doesn't look good.
I don't mind the look of it, but I thought like in terms of how it plays, it just wasn't going to perform. But the performance was there, especially if you like to hit near the top of your paddle. Yep. If you have a tennis stroke and your sweet spot, you want it pushed up further on the. So yeah, I did. Normally I see a paddle that is tapered and I'm like, we're losing some twist weight there. It's not going to have as forgiving a sweet spot, but it's just kind of pushed up a little bit on the paddle face, which I think works for that.
I do feel like it was a little less forgiving. I felt like the dwell time was a little bit less, but the Pro 4 is already so forgiving. I mean, for a pro player, like if you can't control a Pro 4, then you need to, take up a new hobby.
Right. Yeah. So in terms of like the original question was, what's the biggest mistake? Probably going elongated when you haven't tried a wide body. Now, clearly elongated can work for beginners too, but I think you're right. Like having a wider sweet spot rather than a longer, narrower one is going to work better for people with less shot accuracy.
Yeah, and one thing too, think about where you mishit the ball. First of all, I think the mistake, to give you a clear answer, is just the mistake is that you're not trying both.
Yeah,
you should try both. Give each, maybe even try hybrid too.
Yeah.
So give it a good college try, and then instead of just buying the elongated, because that's what Ben Johns uses.
Yeah.
But then also making sure that you recognize where your mishits are coming from, because most people's mishits are actually left to right.
Yeah.
So I was talking to Colin Johns about this, and he's a wide body, a huge proponent of the wide body.
Right.
And he's saying, I think his number was that like 75 or 80% of mishits are left to right on the paddle instead of top to bottom. And I think I don't know the precise number, but I think that's a good representation.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, when I'm mishitting the shot, it's left to right, especially on a slice.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is the ball. There's a reason that you're slicing it. You're coming from left to right on the paddle. You're almost never going to be going up, down. And there's a reason that paddle, for example, Pro XR was the pioneer of this, I believe, where they came out with the grit that was left to right.
Yeah.
Because when you hit the ball, you're hitting it from the left side of the paddle to the right side of the paddle.
Right.
So it would make sense that there could be a use case for more surface area going from left to right instead of bottom to top.
Yeah. Slices and topspin too, because you're brushing up on the ball.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a little weirder because I hit my serve and my topspin drops with a little bit of this. But if you hit, just like you said, if you hit a drive, then you're definitely coming left to right.
Sure. But yeah, and I think people see most male pro players playing with elongated paddles, and then women are more equally distributed between wide body and elongated. But in terms of male pros that play with him. Colin Johns is one. Do you say Max Freeman?
Federico Stakscher, the number 2 player in the world.
He's been playing with he goes back and forth a lot. I want to interview him to get his impressions on paddle shape because he's all over the place.
He went back and forth a lot, but in his last 3 months, he's stuck to the wide body.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
And then I talked to him recently, and he's all in on the wide body.
Yeah, right.
So
Jack Monroe, top player for the APP, big on even a shorter handled wide body paddle because he has a 2E, but he puts 2 fingers on the back.
Matt Wright.
Matt Wright, does he play? Yeah, that's right. That Onyx paddle is a wide body. Who else?
You got Matt Wright, you got Max, you got Colin Johns, you have Jack Monroe, you have. We're definitely missing some wide body legends. Augie Guh. So Augie Guh, I was going to play with him in Cincinnati. He wasn't able to use his Proton Flamingo. So we go into the Pickleball Central tent together. And I was looking through the whole Pickleball Central tent. And I asked the people that were working there, I'm like, guys, I don't really care about shape anymore. I need a Pro 4 now. And I need whichever one has the most grit. I just need, because I love all the Pro 4s. I'm like, just give me grit, because none of them have any grit, these USAP ones.
Yeah.
So we go into the Pickleball Central tent. I find 2 Agassiz that have like a decent amount of grit. I'm like, all right, I'll just buy these. So I bought the only Pro 4s that were available with some sort of grit. And then Augie Guh comes in, and then he's like, oh, I like this 16 millimeter Colin Johns Pro 4. I'm going to buy it. And I'm like, wait a second, Augie, that's not approved. So he tried to buy the wide body.
Oh, okay.
He tried to buy the 16 millimeter wide body, but I'm like, you can't use it. So then he used the Perseus. He did this the day before the tournament. Still played it great, but it was just hilarious. Yeah, so he tried to buy a wide body, just couldn't.
Interesting. I didn't know that he enjoyed the wide bodies. So why doesn't he play with so Proton? Yeah, Proton doesn't have a Gen 3 style and a wide body.
No, they just have the 15 millimeter elongated Proton.
Yeah, that's
Flamingo.
Right. That's right. So we've already talked about this. So it's a little bit redundant, so we can keep it kind of brief. But in terms of paddle shapes, and by the way, I'm still trying to decide if I want to splice in some of our footage, on-court footage yesterday into this interview. I feel like the interview is going to go really long, so we might separate into 2 and or even 3, one on-court footage. But we talked about it on-court yesterday with your impressions while we were playing in terms of switching back and forth between an elongated, hybrid, wide body. I found that very interesting. I think a lot of other people will too. But let's go through the pros and cons of each shape. So we have elongated, hybrid, and wide body. And again, for people that don't know, elongated is anything 16.5 inches and above lengthwise. Wide body, we'll just say, is 16.0 and below. And typically you get a wider body. And hybrid is in between 16.0 and 16.5.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also would like to mention that paddle right there, the Magnus shape, because this is an elongated paddle, but there are differences here. Yeah. And this is actually the technical shape of the paddle that I used previously, which is the Power Air.
Okay.
Because the Power Air, obviously, this is what they called the Invictus shape, and this is much better. But the Power Air did have the short handle and the bigger paddle, so bigger paddle face. Yeah. So there is a reason to actually give a paddle shape like this a shot. And I know RPM is going to be making one just like this. If you're somebody that uses a one-handed backhand, then if you only use a one-handed backhand, give yourself the biggest. And you've got a strong arm and you feel like you're not worried about a higher swing weight or something like that. Give yourself the biggest paddle surface area possible. I mean, I'm all about maximizing the dimensions of the paddle face. So with the Yola Magnus shape, this is going to be slightly bigger than the Pro 4, Perseus that is, because it has a shorter handle. Right. So yeah, give that one a try. I messed around with that and I liked it a lot. And also there is a potential argument that this paddle, from what I can tell, I don't know if it actually passed the newest UPA. I don't know if I saw anybody using that at the recent PPA tournament because it had a little more power. Right. And I think that paddle might have a little bit more power than the Perseus shape because the actual trampoline or paddle face that is bigger. Okay. So anyway, that's just an aside.
It's funny. I was thinking a couple of weeks ago, I was hitting all the new carbon waves paddles, and which shape is it that has the elongated but shorter handle? Is it the 3? I think it's the 3.
And 3. Yeah, it is the 3.
And I was actually liking it. And I think they increased the handle's length by like a quarter of an inch or something. But I was like, I feel like, this is going to be the next paddle shape that has a resurgence because it's kind of a sleeper right now, and not many people want to play with an elongated, shorter handle paddle. But I was actually enjoying it, and you can still fit 2 hands as long as the paddle's not 4 inches or below, right?
I used a Power Air which had a short grip, and I was the two-handed backhand guy.
Right.
So
true.
come on.
Yeah. Okay,
but I'm sorry, I keep going on these tangents.
No,
like you asked me the question and then I don't give you the straight answer. So your question to me was, what are the pros and cons of each shape?
Let's go through it. For elongated,
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry.
We can say already that hybrid is going to fall in between, so we don't need to go into pros and cons of the hybrid. So let's do elongated and wide body.
Yeah, so I mean, we can start with the pros of the elongated paddle. I feel like the plow through is a little bit more just because it's a little bit bigger, a little longer that is. So you can hit some, I've personally felt that I can hit harder serves with an elongated paddle and I can hit harder drives.
Right.
And I also like it for mixed doubles and singles because I can just reach a little further. But that's pretty obvious stuff. I could think of some more niche things that people might not think of. I think if you're flicking the ball, it's better with an elongated paddle, obviously, because you can just reach a little further. If you're somebody that likes to, if you do come from a tennis background and you're used to making contact near the top of your paddle, then I think it makes a little more sense to use an elongated paddle. I actually feel like for whatever reason, I like hitting two-handed backhands with an elongated paddle a little better because I think I benefit a little more from that added plow through. Because it's tough. A lot of times it's just harder to hit a backhand as hard as a forehand. Right. So I think those are the main things. I'm trying to think of some fun, like niche things that I'm not thinking of. Yeah.
One thing, so back to your point about reach, I think a lot of people are like, okay, 0.5 of an inch of reach, what does that really give you any advantage?
It matters.
It does matter, right? And I can see both sides of the argument when you have an open court to stand in, because if you're using a wide body paddle that's half an inch shorter, just move your feet a little bit further over. Improve your footwork. I think there's some validity to that, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you're like, okay, flicks. Because you can stand at the kitchen line. You can't move into the kitchen. So that reach you're able to get with the half an inch matters most for flicks at the kitchen. So what are your thoughts on that?
100%. And taking dinks out of the air, I think, is a little bit easier. But there are some niche things with the wide body that people don't realize. Actually, the return to serve, I think, it's funny. A lot of players say that the return to serve is easier with a wide body. And the reason for that is if somebody hits a hard serve to you, then there's going to be some variance in how that ball bounces. Because it's a pickleball. It's not a perfect ball.
Right.
We're not talking about a holeless Franklin ball here. There are some holes. If it hits the hole, it'll have a different response.
Right.
So then what that means is if you have your paddle this way and it's a little wider, especially if you're taking it on the rise. And a lot of serves are taken on the rise. Because if you rip a serve right at the baseline, I'm not going to be able to get that at the apex. I have to take it on the rise.
Right.
So if I paddle face this way, if it's a half inch wider this way from left to right, then if there's any variance in the bounce, it's a lot less likely I'm going to miss-hit it.
Okay.
All of my miss-hit returns are left to right on the paddle face, right? So that's an interesting thing. And then also just covering your body and switching from backhand to forehand on a volley. Because if you want to just kind of pancake the forehand with a wide body paddle, it's super easy. There's a reason that the wide body is called the shield, because you can just go right at the chest. And obviously the swing weight is lower, the twist weight is higher. So there's a lot of reasons for it.
Anna Bright just put out a video, talking about the pros of the wide body paddle. She plays with the Scorpius, and I think all those are true. So the pros of the wide body, wider sweet spot side to side, which matters as we're talking about, more maneuverable, more lightweight. And the cons are basically the opposite. The pros of the elongated, so less reach and generally less put away power. I think that's one of the more niche things that we haven't discussed in terms of the paddle shape is you get more leverage with a longer handle on a paddle. And I think those work. And don't get me wrong, I love longer handles on wide body paddles like 5.5. I think it is perfect. But once you start getting up into the 6-inch range for a wide body paddle, the face becomes so short because you're limited lengthwise that you're losing a lot of performance with it. So you're able to get a longer handle, more leverage with an elongated paddle and still have enough paddle face to get the job done with good performance, right?
For sure. And I was curious about this too, about your opinion on this. Do you feel like a paddle that is closer to a square shape, where it's as opposed to a rectangle, obviously, do you feel like that's more efficient in terms of actual size of sweet spot? Because you can talk about, of course the sweet spot's bigger left to right. We know that. Right. But do you feel like if it's actually perfectly square, that's more conducive to maximum efficiency of sweet spot size in a paddle?
It's true, but there's
I set you up.
There's an aesthetic quality of square paddles. Let me find it. Shout out to Jam from Honolulu. He's a great paddle company owner, produces great products. He put out the ugliest paddle though in the world, and he's very open to criticism too. So he laughs about it himself.
Oh gosh, there it is.
the dreaded J4 shape, which, he's going by what's going to be the best performance. And this thing has a massive sweet spot.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you.
Nobody's carrying this out of the court because it is so ugly. It's literally a pizza peel. Right?
Oh, my God. It's pretty gritty. Pretty gritty.
Yeah. So
this, I bet you, has a low swing weight.
One interesting thing about pickleball paddles and why they're actually more performative in square shapes versus ovular is because of the rule of 24, right?
Yes.
And the rule of 24 is you take the maximum length, add the maximum width of a paddle, and you can't go over 24 inches. Yep. Now, if we were to account for area of the paddle face or area total of the paddle somehow, then you would see bigger paddles with ovular shape elements to them performing better because you're able to expand, into an area rather than 2x2 or 1x2 dimensions, right? So yeah, that's why we have square paddles, and that's why, because the more you expand the paddle widthwise, the wider the sweet spot, and the same goes for lengthwise. And if you put like a map of the sweet spot, the map of the sweet spot is going to follow the outer dimensions of the paddle. So this one's going to have more sweet spot up higher and wider than one that has the arrow curved top, right? Because you just got more space up here. So it's just, that's why we have square paddles, and that's why they perform better than circular paddles because of the rule of 24.
I know, and that's kind of what I was getting at too with that initial question, which is, because we were experimenting with a fully square elongated shape because I love the higher, not fully square, fully, what's the term? Square at the edges. Like just like that, but just making it elongated.
Okay, right.
Like not having the curve. Yeah, I'm like, why do we have this curve? I don't know, because just like you said, the sweet spot will follow the outer edges.
Right.
So we were going to try to maybe make a, like an elongated paddle like that Magnus, but just have it be like this.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
And clearly there's some performance perks to rounding off the corners because you reduce swing weight. Yeah. So you're increasing hand speed.
But I don't need that. I have the hands.
Right.
I just want a big sweet spot.
Just bring out the ugly square paddle and dominate with it. Make everybody switch over. But I think we've covered the pros and cons of the shapes enough. Before we get into predictions, so we're going to get into like what are we predicting future paddles, the landscape will be like. But I just wanted, since I have you here, I think some people will be curious, like what is the pro life like? And we're going to get back into the gear in a second. But what's the weirdest thing about being a pickleball pro, a touring pickleball pro?
For me, I guess it's just that the weirdest thing is probably that I don't personally feel like I'm famous at all. Like I don't walk around alone like, oh, I'm famous. I have no feeling of that. But then I go to these tournaments, and at the tournament, I'm famous. Like because when I go around in the world, I'm not famous at all. I mean, in South Florida, like there's a lot of people that play pickleball. So once every few days, there might be somebody that says, "Oh, James," like, "Hey," whatever it is. But that's just the hotbed of pickleball.
Right.
And then at the tournament, though, it's like, all day there are people that are asking me for pictures and asking me questions. Now they're asking me coaching questions because I have a coaching the account, and now they're asking me paddle questions.
Right.
It's like they've got I've put all this content out there, and now everybody's just got all these questions for me, and which is fine. But then at the end of the day, I'm there to try to just focus and play a good pickleball game or a few games, and then just go.
And last night we went to Relish, one of the local spots here, and a bunch of people came up. We got a crowd at our court, and people are asking for your picture and stuff.
Which is crazy because I'm not that cool, but I don't know.
Well, you've got to be recognized though outside of outside of pickleball facilities and stuff. Like how many times you get recognized at the grocery store or someplace that is not a pickleball place.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you are, in the country. So in South Florida, it's probably once every 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
Because I'm right in Boca, and that's the spot. But if you go to other parts, like I was in the Northeast, and it's like never, like it just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe in New York City it happened once or twice, but it just really depends on how big pickleball is in that area.
Right.
But one of the weirdest things is probably that. Another weird thing I would say is there's been a couple people that asked me to sign parts of their body.
Right.
Yeah, they for example, I've signed hands because they're like, it's going to make my hand lucky. Some people just want to touch me so that they get the special.
The juju?
Yeah, and I do the same thing. Like I do that with Julie Johnson. I'll always just try to touch because obviously she's got the genes. So I'm like, come on, Julie, just give me that hand.
The Julie juju.
Yeah, so I try to play better that way. So I get it. I get it why they do that. So
That's funny. I noticed also last night we were playing. You ate 3 dinners last night.
I did.
You had a full pizza, you had a grilled sandwich, and you had like a burrito bowl or something. So I've always wondered, because you guys, like, I think people underestimate the number of calories that they're burning on a pickleball court, and especially at the pro level. You're going to basically a tournament every weekend, sometimes every other weekend. If you're making it to Sunday, you're playing like 4 days of like 12-hour pickleball, right, more or less, and it's just a ton of calories. So you've got to eat like a horse, right?
Yeah, I eat basically as much as I can. I try to eat pretty clean. I mean, yesterday was a little bit of a cheat day. I had some pizza, but I don't eat any sugar, so I really try to avoid processed sugar. I don't eat any of it. I don't eat any processed sugar or anything like that. I try to avoid a lot of fried food and stuff like that. So I eat like generally healthy. I eat a lot of greens. So I'll eat a lot of carrots and a lot of spinach, and I have a couple green juices every day.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you can't be eating so perfectly clean because you have to just eat a lot. So I just eat a lot, but I keep it within the realm of cleanness.
Yeah.
And then I have a lot of greens. Yeah. And that's about it. I don't really overthink it, but I eat a ton of food.
Oh, I'm sure you have to, right? Like I was hungry last night after like halfway playing for an hour, and you've been coming off tournaments and all this. I noticed also, and I'm very happy that you're a coffee drinker.
I love coffee.
Black coffee. Yeah.
It takes, if you want to start a pickleball paddle company from scratch and also be a professional player and also do all these clinics, you need to be coffee packed. You can't just be, so I have like 3 coffees a day.
You've got to be fueled, right?
Yeah. So I have 3. I wake up, I have a coffee, then I'll have a coffee at around like 12, then I'll have another coffee at like 2:30 or 3.
Okay. Yeah.
So I really.
I'm a big coffee drinker.
For the record, this coffee that John made me is amazing.
Yeah.
I finished it already. It's gone. Or there's a little bit left.
A Kenyan bean made with an AeroPress. Yeah. So good stuff.
Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. All right. And then we have to ask, what was the story behind the big Poppa Jimmy comment and the gold medal interview? When was it, like 2023?
That was
Indoor Championships, right?
It's crazy how that happened, because I had never said that to anybody before. Nobody had ever called me that before. I was just on such a high. It was my first ever, I think, championship Sunday in doubles. And I don't really know what got into me. I almost just blacked out. And I just was like, I'm big Poppa Jimmy, And so it was so funny, because after that moment, everybody started calling me it. And at the next tournament, it was like, I went from random person, because I was kind of known in pickleball, but I wasn't like a, very much known person in pickleball. At the next tournament, every single, I was so shocked by how many like middle-aged men were now calling me Big Papa. I was like, what, this is not what I signed up for. A bunch of guys calling me daddy, basically, and it's just wild.
So funny.
Yeah,
I remember watching that interview live, and I thought it was the most hilarious thing. And then like the next day, I was talking to my friends. It was like, dude, did you see the James Ignatowich interview? Like, he needs to win some more so we can see more of these interviews. I think you're also cramping and drinking pickle juice all through the tournament. And you're just like, you push through. So, All right. Now onto the funnest part, I think. And now we'll get into some Q&A. We got several questions from some of the viewers. But I wanted to get into kind of the future of paddles. And first thing I want to talk about is when do we hit peak paddle? And that would be like, some of the other sports, they're kind of at their limit in terms of the performance of their gear, golf, for example. So do you think it's going to happen anytime? Do you think it'll ever happen? When do you think we'll hit peak paddle?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely going to happen. I mean, if you look at tennis, for example, or golf, I mean, tennis is, I think, the closest comparison. All of the rackets are kind of the same. Yeah. If you open them up, there is no, there's no racket dissection on pickleball medicine for a reason, because it's like you dissect it, it's all the exact same thing. So it is kind of solved, and it's the same thing in golf. It's the same thing in pretty much every, solved sport. I don't think pickleball is close to that yet. I think there's going to be a point in a few years where we're like, okay, I think we kind of did it, and then something else is going to happen. We're going to say, okay, there's another iterative change that gets made. Yeah. So for me to kind of project where it's going to be or when that's going to happen, I think is almost impossible, because then the question is, okay, what do we consider changes that make it perfect versus changes that are just like iterative things that are kind of just subjective based on companies wanting to differentiate themselves from other companies. Right. So I think when we get to the point of everything being within 5% of each other. And a lot of people at home, I mean, I'm sure the people that watch your podcasts know this, but a lot of people think all paddles already are kind of the same thing. Right. Like I've had comments on my Instagram, what's going to differentiate your paddle? It's the same thing as everything else. No, paddles are all over the place, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
But I think, I can't say when we're going to get to the point where everything is basically the exact same, but I think that if I were just to guess, because I have no idea, I would guess that maybe in 5 years, we're going to get to the point where it's like, okay, we found the right material, we found the right way to lay it out and everything. And I think, but then it comes into question, okay, do we find the perfect glue, the perfect epoxy? Because there's actually different things. Pickleball paddles have more variables than tennis rackets. Yeah. And that's what people don't realize. Like the glue that you use matters. And so you have to, and there's so much experimenting being done, or to be done, is carbon fiber the right surface? Probably. That's the one thing I would say that I'm pretty confident in. But is EPP foam the final foam? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And it's interesting because nobody really saw the full foam core, floating core coming, and I don't think we realized how much that would improve a full foam core. So we had Carbon did all of the, R&D on expanded polypropylene full foam cores. We had like solid cores like the Adidas before that, they played horribly, but like the full foam core, Carbon was the first to market. And this was this year, January. And look where we've come so far. Like floating that in a band of EVA makes it an entirely better paddle. The sweet spot gets enormous. You get more control. You can tweak the power according to the density of the foams and stuff. So, holy cow! Like adding a strip, floating that EPP foam inside of an EVA band, what a difference it makes. And I feel like we just kind of stumbled on that. That would be a fun piece of investigative journalism. Figure out who invented that. I kind of think it was one of the paddle factories in China. Like some dude was there and was like, let's try this because it was low hanging fruit. We already had the molds for the 11624 Power Series and Selkirk era, right? It's just replacing that polypropylene honeycomb with the EPP. And like the difference between the full foam floating core and the honeycomb, I think, is much more profound. It makes it such a better paddle. So I think that was invented at the factory and shopped out to paddle companies.
Yeah, and that's another thing that not all the paddle manufacturers are aware of. It's like you can tell your factory to go innovate and mess around. Right. Like I do that with my with a couple of the factories we work with. I'm like, hey, so I'm kind of experimenting with this. I have no idea what the future is with full foam. Right. I think we kind of solved, to a certain extent what the Gen 3 paddle can be, but full foam is just a wild west.
For sure.
So just go out there and give me like 20 different samples. I'll pay for them. I'll give you some guidelines of what I'm thinking, and then just I'll try them. Yeah. And it's fun. Yeah. And that actually, I think it also helps the factory, the supplier, feel more engaged too, and it gives them a little more invested in the process. Maybe they have a little fun with it. Yeah. Maybe they have no fun with it. Maybe they don't care. I don't know, but I'm asking for samples anyway.
No, exactly. Which begs the question, like that was just an iterative change. I feel like almost by mistake, people figured out how to make paddles so much better. What's the next low-hanging fruit where people are just going to be like, you know what, just that little tweak, but it's going to have profound impact on paddle performance?
That's a good question. It's tough because I guess there are still something of like moving goalposts with regulations that make, and then the question is, so your question is, what's the next thing that maybe the supplier will think of? Because the first thing that I think of as far as like, oh, this was a change that made a big difference was Gen 3 and also compressing the cores. Because I don't know if compressing the cores was actually Yola's idea, if it was the factory's idea.
Sure.
I don't know. So what's the next thing? Well, it would probably be something that makes the sweet spot or the paddle face as a whole play super similarly all across the face, because it's not going to be something that really increases the spin or really increases the power, probably because there's limitations that are put in place. Yeah. So I would imagine it'll be something that really increases the dwell time or the sweet spot size. It's not going to increase the deflection too much because we're still testing for deflection.
Right.
So it would have to be something that I think either does that, or but then again, it's, do factories want to mess around with something like that? I don't know, because it'll be harder for them to probably do things that make the paddle play the exact same all around the paddle face. Like it would probably include things like, instead of just one EVA foam ring that's all the same density, it would probably have, for example, it'd be a little softer near the bottom because softer foam is correlated with a stronger response, more power usually. Right. So then it'd be a little harder toward the top and then a little softer at the bottom so that those things even out. Because at the top, you're naturally going to get a little more power.
That's true.
So it would be something like that, but that's tough.
Gearbox is doing that a little bit in their paddles already. They're using different modulus and different orientations of the carbon fiber ribs to have some softness and stuff in their core. So Yeah, that's cool. And we'll come back, we'll table that, come back to it in our, what do we predict is going to be the next innovations in paddle technology. But I was thinking like low hanging fruit, just like, oops, we've discovered that this was like pretty amazing. I think you're right. It's going to be in the full foam arena, just finding a different type of foam.
Memory foam?
Memory foam, just placed in certain areas, pushing the density of the paddle out to the edges instead of keeping it in the center, Or, there might be some benefit to multi-density, maybe putting a little bit of density in the center and then manipulating it across the paddle face. We're not there. And then in terms of your 5-year estimate for peak paddle, I think that's a fair estimate. I think also that regulatory agencies will control that and maybe push it back further because they take the rule of 24, for example. If we change that to area of the paddle face, that's going to open up a whole new realm in terms of paddle innovation, right?
Yeah. You can't, right? Because then then you could just make an infinitely long handle.
Well, have a limit on the length of the paddle and the width, obviously, but then combine that with the area.
I think honestly, now that I think about it, I don't actually think it's 5 years. I think it's longer.
Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the fun topic. Do you think pros are slowing down paddle innovation? Now, what I mean by that is pros get locked into a paddle and, sometimes because they're, sponsored by a company, but each pro that's been playing for a long period of time has a preference that's kind of a little bit old school, right? Look at Ben Johns. I saw that you mentioned he prefers fiberglass.
That's crazy.
Fiberglass, right? Because that's what he started with. And you, as a pro, you don't want to be switching paddles all the time. You want to be locked into your paddle and you want to know it inside and out. But I feel like most pros, like you said, hardly any are playing with full foam paddles. But I think they objectively play better because you don't want to go through that learning curve. You don't have time to go through a learning curve on a new paddle as a pro, right? So do you think that they're slowing down innovation?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could be prepared for that great question. I'm just joking. I guess my initial thoughts on that would be like, I think that there's a couple of different things. Pros have different priorities from amateurs, if you think about it. So and pros' priorities, they don't care about durability because they're getting unlimited paddles.
Right.
So if they're getting unlimited paddles, they're just going to say what plays the best right now in this exact moment. And when I talk to pros or like high 5.0s, they all say the same thing, which is that like a pretty broken in Gen 3 style of paddle just can give you more top end, potential of how well you can play. I personally feel like when I use a full foam paddle, if I'm really ripping hard serves and ripping drives and ripping returns, it's a little tougher for me to control the ball. But then again, that could just be my subjective feeling because I've played with honeycomb for so long, just like you said.
Right.
So I think are pros slowing down innovation? I think that's actually I think that's possible. I think it's probably true, actually, because I think that if I'm a paddle manufacturer and I don't play, I would say, well, shoot, I have to make something that pros like. Because if I make something that pros like, then there's more likely, for pros to use my paddle without me having to pay them so much. And that's what you see with Yola, for example. Every pro wants to use the Yola. So Yola has all these pros that are not even actually being paid. There are a ton of pros that are using the Yola for free, buying Yolas. Alex Strong, for example, I was talking to her. I don't know if it's probably fine. Yeah, she bought her last Yola. It's like, isn't that crazy? And she's like, so I think that's a huge advantage to make a paddle that somebody likes. Because I know me personally, before I was signed, if somebody had, for example, with a full foam paddle that I just wasn't comfortable with and didn't really enjoy, I would have said, you got to pay me a lot for me to use this paddle. So there's a real reason for paddle companies to want to cater to pros. Because then obviously 5.0s will watch what pros do.
Right.
And then, 4.5s and 4.0s will watch what 5.0s do. Yeah. And so there's a big trickle-down effect. And it really does matter what I guess the pros are using. And that, so are they slowing down innovation? Maybe. Yeah, I think maybe it's just a matter of paddle companies saying, okay, fine, if the pros want to use what they want to use, that's cool, but we have to stick to our guns and keep working on what we're making. So.
I think you brought up a really great point with durability. I think there's definitely an issue with durability because pros don't need to play with the paddle for any longer than they want to play with it. So, for example, how often do you switch your paddle?
Yeah, so when I was using a Selkirk Power Air with spray-on grit, I was going through one paddle every 3 days.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
And you have an infinite supply, but I think given that paddle companies are tailoring what their paddle technology to what the pros want, and it is a trickle-down thing because consumers want to buy what pros are playing with, durability has suffered in a big way on pickleball paddles, like grit durability. And I I don't think this was designed by Yola. This wasn't their grand plan to make, more disposable paddles and sell a bunch of them. But man, they landed on a magic formula, didn't they? Where all the top players want to play with pro paddles. You bought your last Yola paddle yourself. Alex Trong did. And pros are actually buying the paddles to play with them. They get all the visibility. They are giving the pros exactly what they want. Elite performance paddles, big sweet spot, good power, good spin, but they don't last very long. And then all the amateurs, if you go out and look in the wild, 90% of people are playing with Yolas. Maybe that's an overinflation, but a lot of people are playing with Yolas. And yes, they are good about warranting the paddles and you can send them back, but there are also a lot of people that just buy a new one every 3 weeks because they need that top performance. So man, they landed on this magic formula. I think it was by accident, but they're catering to the pros. The amateurs are following. But my point of this is that, I think there's some suffering in terms of innovation, especially over durability because you give the pros what they want, and the pros don't need durability, so it's not really an issue, right?
Yeah, and I think they do have a magic formula. I mean, me personally, I bought 3 of them for the tournament, and I'm not going to send them back. I don't care. I'll just keep them. I paid $900 almost.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm not that guy to like warranty all my stuff. Like I'm not that, I'll just keep them in my house. If somebody wants an Agassi Yola, let me know. I'll send it to you.
Right.
You have to pay me.
All right, let's get into our predictions. So what technologies and materials do we see that aren't currently being used or are that are going to iterate in our future perfect paddles and our peak paddle in 5 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, just speaking with you yesterday, learning about these foam factories and just how dialed in they are in China with foam, it's like it makes a lot of sense to think that, it's good because you're not really starting from scratch with foam. There are already these mechanisms in place for foam to get made. Like you were saying that it was like EPP foam backpacks, right? So they already know how to make foam and they already know how to create backpacks out of it or whatever the case may be. So, I would say I'm currently learning about like the supercritical foams, MPP foams. I'm trying to really get dialed in on that because maybe that's the next thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think it's probably some blend of those things. I don't think it's definitely not going to be. So what I'll tell you for sure, it's not going to be one slab of any particular material.
Sure.
It's almost impossible. I mean, I remember I first played with the Selkirk 008, which was just one slab of EPP foam, and it was the worst paddle I've ever personally played with, right, outside of the Z5, right? And so, like, you can't have one slab of anything. One slab of anything almost works never, right? I mean, you look at Gen 1 paddles that are just one slab of honeycomb, or not a slab, but one piece of honeycomb. It's you need some sort of blend. So it's probably some sort of blend of something in the core that I don't really think is EPP probably, unless I'm wrong. I mean, it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's a supercritical foam. Maybe it's like what you were saying with memory foam, how sometimes memory foam actually makes a Pro 4 that's not a Pro 4. Or like, what do they call those? The counterfeit Pro 4s. Yeah, the counterfeit Pro 4s that have memory foam at the bottom might actually sometimes play better than the real ones because that memory foam, right? Yeah. So you never know. Maybe it's like MPP with memory foam here and it's or some other substance that we never heard of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much potential for innovation and foam and blended foams and, and dual multi-density foams.
Well, I would say this too. I would say like another thing is the surface. I mean, maybe it's a different type of, there's some sort of layout. Because right now, if you look at a Yola, for example, it's just 3 layers of carbon fiber and it's, 0 degrees by 90 degrees by 0 degrees. Right. Maybe there's different, maybe there's different layups. Maybe there's different modulus of carbon fiber. Or for example, you've got like, maybe it's T300 on the side, so it's actually a little bit more dwell time, a little softer, and then in the middle it's a little stiffer so that it balances out, and that also could help you pass PBCOR.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a ton of potential. I think we've kind of maximized, the current menu options that the factories are providing in terms of putting the fiberglass in the middle versus the bottom, or no fiberglass, carbon fiber, Kevlar. The current menu options, I think, are kind of exhausted, but I think there's still a ton of potential on the surface layup for different materials. I think we're going to start borrowing from board sports, surfing, skateboarding, that sort of thing for the surface layup because they do have these composite materials that we haven't tried yet in pickleball. So I think that's rife for exploring. Grit. Let's talk about grit for a second. Spin. So I feel like, obviously raw carbon fiber or peel ply textures, epoxy-based textures have been
carbon fiber.
Yeah, have been king of spin for a good while now, a few years. Ever since carbon put out the first peel ply paddle. And yes, they're more durable than the spray-on grits up to now. But now we're seeing some innovation and spin, and I feel like there's performance differences in different spins too. So the peel ply gets two different types of spin I'm recognizing. I'd love to get your pro opinion on this. So there's kind of the flicky spin at the kitchen, which requires very sharp points of contact because you're barely brushing the ball. And then there's the full swing serves and drives, topspin and slice from the baseline, right? So you're taking a bigger backswing. And I feel like for peel ply, we're getting pretty durable spin on the order of weeks for pros and months for amateurs with the big swings from the baseline, but almost immediately, within a few hours, you lose that flicky kind of kitchen spin where you can actually dip, or even our dinks, your two-handed backhand dink, to get it to really dip with that top spin. You're requiring some sharpness on the peaks so there's those two types of spin, and I feel like peel ply, that goes away very quickly at the kitchen. Versus the newer textures, I think that Infinigrit has some promise here because it's sharper grit. It is spray on. It does seem maybe as durable and maybe even more durable than peel ply. We're not sure. And then this diamond grit from 6.0 that's coming out, which is actually a peel ply. So it's pieces of diamond grit embedded in epoxy. So when pieces of the diamond fall off, there's more beneath it until you get all the way through the epoxy. So that's very promising. So what are your thoughts in terms of innovation on spin?
It's interesting because I guess I would just say as a disclaimer, like some people think that now, because this is kind of, people are talking about this, that spin is all about dwell time and not about surface roughness. And I know that I think that started when, UPA stopped testing with a limit for surface roughness. So for those of you who don't know, PPA paddles, there's technically no surface roughness limit. They test for it to make sure that the ones that that these companies are selling publicly are the same or within 10% for quality control variants. But there's no limit on it because they don't think it's correlated enough with surface roughness, which makes me think, well, I'll say this. So because you'd have the spin test is, I think, inbound 40 miles an hour.
Yes.
So the spin test is inbound 40 miles an hour. So that's actually...
And the paddle is clamped at 30 degrees, so it bounces off, and they measure with the high-speed camera, the RPM, right?
Yeah. And so basically that's has nothing to do with how much spin you're getting on a dink. Right? I mean, at least for me, it's probably not that much.
Right.
But a dink, so peel ply matters a lot for spin on dinks.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. Surface roughness is a big deal if you're working on these little flicky shots where you just need instant grab and you're not actually activating any dwell time.
Right.
So dwell time has, there's a big difference in how much dwell time you're getting on a drive or a serve versus a little flick or, a dink.
Yeah.
So, ideally, you want both. You want dwell time and you also want grit or surface roughness.
Right.
Because if you, for example, Max Freeman, he's got a really flicky game and he uses a Pro 4 because he loves the dwell time and the amount of spin that he gets on drives with a Pro 4 with, the Pro 4 USAP does not have a lot of grit at all, but the spin he gets on drives is great. But he's out here missing flicks all the time because it's just sliding off of his paddle. Yeah. So you can't tell me that the roughness doesn't matter. I think. Sure. But it'd be kind of cool. It'd be interesting if there was a way for them to incorporate a spin test at like a 20 mile an hour inbound.
Yeah,
or something like that.
But I think there's a ton of potential for innovation and grit to make it play great at the kitchen and the baseline and to keep it more durable, especially for that catchy, flicky spin,
Well, the thing too is, if you have for example, peel ply, they say that it's not going to get impacted by the ball because it's qualitatively harder than the ball. So
that's not true.
Yeah. Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So if it's harder than the ball and it's not going to get impacted, for example, there are things that are softer than me that could definitely impact me. Right. Like a pickleball is softer than me. If it hits me in the face, it hurts.
If that were true, then you could use a paddle eraser on a grit paddle, right? It wouldn't affect Infinigrit because Infinigrit is harder. But you can't, because if you rub a rubber eraser across Infinigrit or diamond texture, it's going to eventually rub away
Totally. And there's different peaks, So, I think one of the things too is maybe if I were going to make a surface, this is a good question. Like if I were going to make something that's not peel ply, like for example, Infinite Grit is spray on grit. And there are, negative connotations with spray on grit because everybody thinks of like the old, the Power Air, the Franklin back in the day where it would just come off right away. Like there are different levels of what a spray on grit could be. So maybe you make a spray on grit that's just, super hard. I don't really know. Like make it really hard, really tough, but still have really sharp peaks.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would suggest on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of looking into it, and I think it's all about the epoxy, and there's different kind of temper, like how pottery's tempered. You put it in like grass and stuff in pottery so it doesn't explode. So you can temper epoxy as well to increase its durability. So if we can embed, similar to what 6-0 is doing, really hard particles in grit, diamond or even silica is another hard particle, and keep the epoxy more durable, then we're going to not lose our kitchen spin as quickly. There's also pressure-sensitive adhesives, which they're blending these elastomers within the epoxy to, increase the durability of those. And like I said, kind of tempering the epoxy with different types of fibers. So you can actually use like little tiny pieces of carbon fiber as the temper in there, or glass, so fiberglass, basalt, and other natural fibers. Nobody, as far as I know, nobody's experimenting with this because there's no incentive to do it because, the paddles are more disposable, and not saying there's some, kind of conspiracy where paddle companies are purposefully putting out, disposable paddles to make more money. But it's just like, we're not getting that done. And I think that the paddle company that brings these more durable grits to the market, it will be duly rewarded, right? And then everybody's going to follow. It's not like there's not an incentive at all, but I just don't think anybody's really thinking about it too much right now.
I would say this too, to think of like, so the actual, how hard that epoxy is does matter with, how much dwell time you're going to get. So you might not want it to be, because there's durability. And of course, if you make it super hard, then it should be more durable. But if it's harder, then that could impact the dwell time if it's less soft.
Yeah.
You want it to be soft.
Yeah. That's one of the things with the elastomers is that it does soften it up. And if you add too much of the hard grit into the epoxy, I was reading some durability tests on that, it actually decreases the durability. You get a lot of the grit falls out, and
that would make sense if it's brittle.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the elastomers soften it up and allow it to be more abrasion resistant and impact resistant, right? So, and that's sort of what the temper does as well.
It's crazy. Nobody experiments with, because we were thinking, like, because I'm all about like the glue and the epoxy. It matters. It's like the epoxy on a pickleball paddle is like the strings on a tennis racket almost.
Right. Yeah.
And nobody talks about it. Yeah. So I mean, I was talking to my supplier about like let's just try all these different epoxies. Let's just try every peel ply we can and just see what happens. Because sometimes there's different, you can orient the grits and the grit and the peaks and valleys in different ways, and that impacts the spin. Just the actual epoxy that you're using will impact the spin too. And some of it. And of course, if, for example, we had a paddle that was super gritty, but we didn't get a lot of spin with it because I think there was something wrong with the peaks and valleys. They might have just been, and that happens all the time, right? Like this stuff is all, the epoxy matters. And so just like you said.
I think that's where the PPL research showing less of a correlation than you expect between the size of the grit and the spin. I think that where that comes into play is like sometimes, I get like clearly a legal paddle, that in terms of RZ, at USAP standards, in terms of the size of the grit or the peel ply, but it doesn't spin as much as I was expecting. And like you said, something about like the peaks of the peel ply. But so it doesn't necessarily correlate, but there has to be some grit there, especially to get some kitchen
for
spin,
sure.
Right?
And it also calls into question. I mean, there's a lot of options for, like if you're not actually testing for, let's just put it this way. So I would never do this, but I could technically make a paddle that I submit to the UPA and it's got insane grit, but I've tuned the epoxy in a way where the peel ply is not going to actually generate a ton of spin.
Right.
So then it goes under that 2100 RPM. And then I go out there in the tournament and they do this on-site testing where they'll test the grit and then it'll and I'm sure they're not looking at a microscope to look at the peel ply or they're not qualitatively looking at the epoxy and saying, does this generate more spin or does it not? So then I go to the PPA tournament with grit that's the exact same, but it's tuned to have, perfect spin potential. And then I'm out there with a 2300 RPM, cheat code paddle.
No, right.
So there's that's just a side
There's
note.
that to worry about with the certification.
I keep taking us off track.
No,
I'm sorry.
I love it. This is we're going deep here. All right, the last thing I think we can talk about in terms of innovation for future paddles is sweet spot. How do we get true edge-to-edge sweet spot? And we know the variables right now, increasing twist weight, putting the weight out towards the edge as opposed to the middle, broadens the sweet spot. But I feel like there's many other ways to make an incredible sweet spot. I'll throw it to you first if you have any ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the foam and the internal components is all it all makes sense for people at home. It's not basic, but it's pretty intuitive, which is just that you can't have the exact same, type of material all throughout the paddle. It has to be some sort of hybrid layup.
Right.
So, you're probably thinking softer foam around the edges, which is what a Gen 3 paddle will give you. I mean, if you put your thumb into the outside of an edge or near the edge guard of a Yola, it's going to feel soft, and that'll probably fail deflection.
Right.
If they test deflection at the edges of one of those paddles, it's going to fail, but in the center it's harder. And the reason for that is that makes it a little bit more forgiving around the edges. So it's definitely something where it's going to be a more forgiving material as you get to the outside of it, but you also want the weight to be more distributed toward the outside of it.
Right.
So that stuff, I think it's unsolved. I would say the surface layer is something that I think people could definitely look at. I mean, so for example, it would actually, in my opinion, be something kind of like the opposite of what 11.624 did, where they tried to increase the twist weight. And I was watching your episode on this, where they increased the twist weight by adding additional carbon fiber reinforcement near the edges.
Right.
And my first thought was, I don't think that's the right way to do it, because if you're going on the outside of the paddle, you want it to be as forgiving as possible. Mm-hmm. And just because a material increases the twist weight of a paddle, that doesn't actually mean that it's going to increase the sweet spot.
Exactly.
And of course, those things are correlated.
Right.
If we had everything the exact same, the paddle between two paddles, the paddle with the higher twist weight will have a bigger sweet spot, or at least a wider sweet spot.
Right.
But if you're using harder materials, I mean, carbon fiber, you can make a rocket out of it. It's one of the hardest materials in the world. So if you're putting it on the edge where you actually want as much forgiveness as possible, it'll increase the twist weight, but it's not going to expand the sweet spot probably. And that was my personal feeling. Everybody has their different opinions on the Selkirk Era Power or the 11.624 because they're kind of basically the same thing.
Right.
I always felt like on my return of serves with my Selkirk Era Power that if I mishit it a little bit, it was going nowhere. I didn't really like the sides. I felt like the edges were, I felt like it was too rough, especially if it wasn't broken in. So I say that all to say that it's not just about twist weight, it's actually about, just the qualitative properties of materials that are going to be on the outside. So then you think maybe the opposite of that would be something where it's a little stiffer in the middle as it relates to not just core materials, but face sheet materials. Mm-hmm. So let's say you take a paddle, you take a paddle, for example, and let's say that you have, so it's got to have at least 3 layers. You can't have 2 layers anywhere. That'd be kind of crazy, you think?
Yeah, some paddles are using 2 layers. Yeah.
Maybe.
Although the second layer is usually a bidirectional weave, so technically it's 3, but yeah. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, either way, just a random idea could be, from here you have that extra, whether it's carbon fiber or fiberglass, you have an extra layer, and then there's less out here. So that it's going to feel more forgiving, because if you hit the center of the paddle, it's going to be pretty forgiving anyway. If you hit the center of anything, it's going to be forgiving enough. Yeah. And then that could also help you pass PBCOR, because it's a little stiffer in the middle, and they're only testing the middle.
So I'm going to shout out again to Gearbox. That's what he's actually doing with the carbon fiber ribs.
He's doing everything I'm talking about. Right. I don't even know this guy.
So he's changing the modulus on the ribs around the perimeter, on the sides, to get them to a little softer and a little stiffer in the center without sacrificing the weight issue. So he's just found a way to tweak the stiffness without adding weight to the center, right?
That's the thing, because you don't want it to have too much weight going right up the...
Exactly.
So because obviously weight around the edge, we all know is generally better. So then maybe you find a way to have a super high density foam that's all around the edge, but also one that's not too hard. Right. So that's interesting, because it can't be too hard.
Yeah. So in terms of sweet spot, I see
there's
like
no more coffee.
I see kind of 2 realms of sweet spot. One is kind of the objective reality of how a paddle plays across its face. So I actually have I can actually map the sweet spot based on my PBCOR cannon, the QCOR cannon, longitudinally. I have all this data for hundreds of paddles shooting from 3, 4, 5, 6 down to 7, 8 inches sometimes, right? And you can see that the variance, sometimes paddles will have a very hot spot where you get a really high peak on the QCOR, and then it drops off dramatically. So you get this very steep curve. Yeah. And then others are very flat. So they play almost the same across the entire paddle face. So that's an objective sweep. It's harder to do that side to side because the paddle wants to twist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but technically you could get that data and you could map with the heat map the sweet spot of a paddle. But there's another element to sweet spot that I think plays a bigger role than most people think, and that's vibration nodes.
Exactly.
So you can have a paddle that gets amazing response across the paddle face, but certain areas of that paddle are going to feel like garbage when you hit it because they're sending the wrong vibrations into your hands.
And
right?
a quick interjection on that too is some people think that the level of vibration dampening is just a feel thing, and it doesn't impact the sweet spot. It's actually both. It feels bad and it does impact the play.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, did you ever see me tap on a paddle with a drum mallet before?
No.
So, this is a fun thing. So, I got this from baseball. There's an article that talks about the kind of the objective sweet spot on a baseball bat versus the one that there's a neurobiological one related to vibration frequencies. So you can't do this if you're just holding the paddle because you're dampening all of the vibration nodes just by holding it.
Nice. So
if you hang it from a string, you can actually tap on it. And this is the Rhombus Ripple, the original one. And I've got the paddle marked here. And what you'll hear is that there's a fundamental node of vibration when I'm tapping down by the throat and at the tip of the paddle. And that vibration, that sound goes away on what we perceive as the most favorable spot to hit the paddle because those vibrations are no longer going into your hand.
Oh, yeah.
So let's do this here. So I'll start down here at the neck, so 7 inches. You hear that tone?
Yep.
Like a wood block. I'll start down here at the tip of the paddle, the head of the paddle. Now I'm going to go towards the center, and you can hear at the spot where it's going to feel best to hit it because that sound's going to go away.
Mm-hmm. And that's right. That's how they find the sweet spot of a baseball bat.
Yep. Right there. 4.5 inches, right, is where it feels best to hit this one. And the reason why I chose this one to demonstrate this is because the performance location on this paddle is down at 7 inches. That returns the highest PBCOR on this paddle. So there's a discrepancy between where it feels good to hit the paddle and where the paddle returns the most energy. So definitely a neurobiological element to this where it feels better to hit the paddle regardless of the response you're getting off the paddle face. And it's funny. You can go deep into this.
It's such a great thing to bring up.
Yeah. So there are different modalities of somatic pressure, so where you feel vibration frequencies, based on the nerve receptors across your body. So in some, like if your shoulder's very low on absorbing, like detecting vibration, but clearly humans are evolved to use their hands so much that we have highly sensitive receptors in our hands. So these subcutaneous receptors in our hands have peak sensitivity at 250 to 300 hertz, which is in the high frequency range.
Yeah.
I've been measuring the tonal frequencies of paddles. That's one of the things I'm going to put into my paddle app.
Nice.
Like an audio component to it. So the higher frequencies are very sensitive, and it drops off by more than a factor of 10 at 50 hertz. So the lower bassier frequencies, we're not as prone to like recognize those in our hand. So all of this is to say that like as you hit a paddle, it depends not only on like the fundamental vibrations, but it also depends on your grip on the handle, right?
Yes.
There are all these nodes. Like you'll see, I think there's, I might put something in the B-roll. I think like Pickleball Science had mapped out the modal frequencies on the paddle, and you see like a band right here where there's less vibration and more down here. So if you're like, a Callum who holds his paddle with a ping pong grip, you're going to want to hit it different, presumably further up the paddle to reduce the vibrations coming into your hand versus like the Tiger Black who holds her, kind of cups the butt cap of her handle in her palm, right? And then there's the normal kind of 5 centimeter grip or fulcrum. So lots of stuff to consider there, right? And
I mean, that's a great thing to bring up because Pickleball Science, that's the guy that I worked with to learn about the paddles.
Exactly.
He taught me a ton, and you would love to talk to him probably because that was a big thing we were trying to figure out. Or I mean, he kind of had it figured out that I was curious about. It's like you have this sweet spot, which is the subjective sweet spot where it's like, oh, this feels great. This is the spot where the vibrations are minimized in my hand.
Right.
But that's not always the exact same thing as what you say is the performance location.
Right.
That could be completely different things. And then the next question is, do you want them to be the same thing or do you not?
Exactly. Should they align or should they not? We don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah.
So
So I think that's fascinating, and there are materials that come into this in terms of innovation to reduce the vibration frequencies. But yeah, I mean the low hanging fruit here in terms of what we know from research is that you want to avoid this 250 to 300 hertz range, and that's very easy to do with different types of foam, right? That's why I think we're so in love as paddle reviewers with the full foam, dual density, EVA band floating full foam, because we're not feeling those harsh vibrations, right? And maybe pros will eventually embrace those, maybe never, but I think objectively and subjectively, it's easier to feel great hitting these newer foam paddles.
And something too that Pickleball Science was kind of explaining, and shout out to him because he's got all these great articles that are like super fun to read. Yeah. He was saying that the level of vibration dampening that a paddle will make you feel in certain spots has an impact on the PBCOR test. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's right, or maybe if you want to expand on that?
I haven't done enough research to know for sure, but I imagine, that it would probably play a role. I don't see how it could.
He was saying that like certain paddles, he actually can predict it more accurately than what he subjectively feels is like a more powerful paddle or not. Like he was saying that he tested the 11624 power versus the 11624 all court, and the all court had a higher PBCOR rating than the power. That was what he said. And so he was saying that it's actually a really realistic, or one of the best ways to determine what a paddle's PBCOR is going to be is just literally just the vibration dampening at these locations. Okay. So, that's his where I don't know, but check his website out.
Yeah. And I'll link to it in the description. He's got a ton of really deep stuff on his website. All right. Let's move on. This is our final segment here. So Q&A. So I asked this morning on a YouTube post to send some questions. So got a bunch of good ones. We'll start with user Wingzia 4000. So he's referring to you, James. I saw your interview with Zane. Great, honest, and open stuff. It was very interesting on the sweet spot discussion. Do all pros hit the high sweet spot only on drives and serves? And why hitting the sweet spot generates more power? Is it simply because the upper part of the paddle moves faster during the swing?
Yeah, well, I guess the first part of that question is, pros hitting the top of the paddle a little more than they might hit the geometric center of the paddle. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a couple reasons for that. I think having a tennis background is definitely correlated with that. Yeah. And another thing is if you really like to flick the ball and if you like to be aggressive, and pros have a tendency to take more balls out of the air and be a little more aggressive with their flicks, you're going to hit that top of the paddle a lot more. Right. So I was talking to Ben Johns about this. He said he'll hit the top of his paddle on purpose a lot more, which is kind of, and amateurs probably can't relate to this. I hardly ever do this where I'm like trying to hit the top of the paddle. I mean, that's a little crazy, right. But Ben Johns is pretty good. But I mean, so that's a good question. I think hitting the top of the paddle is something that sometimes we'll do on purpose, sometimes we won't, but we definitely do it more often, especially on overheads. Right. I think that if you just think about it, you're actually hitting an overhead, and an overhead is a put away shot, you want to try to finish the point. If you're hitting an overhead the right way, which is, I guess there's not enough space up there, but for the most part, from what we found is you're going to hit closer to the top of the paddle because you're snapping your wrist, you're going to kind of get it up here. It's actually not that easy to hit an overhead right in the geometric center of the paddle face. Yeah. So that's just from we saw with our slow motion videos. And also for whatever reason on slow motion videos of my serve, when I hit the serve, I let the ball drop, and then I'm going to make contact, right around here. And when I look at my paddle, there's just a lot more of the just ball residue because I don't actually use a carbon fiber eraser. I know I did a video on it, but I don't have time. so really, I deal with a lot of ball residue, but I see a lot more up here than I do down here. That's for sure. Yeah. So another thing too is when you're resetting the ball, that's when you're more likely to hit this part of the paddle, just to block and reset. Yeah. And you don't need a lot of power. Right. You just need to make the ball. So I think those are the key things there. And then the next part of the question was, why do you want to make contact with the sweet spot? Well, it's, there's a lot of reasons. That's why it's called the sweet spot, minimal vibration dampening. And then it's oftentimes really correlated with the performance location. It's not always the same thing. Just like you said with the rhombus, how it can be really, disconnected from the performance location. Performance location being the highest PBCOR result, most power. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons at the sweet spot.
Yeah, I think there's some nuance in his question in the sense that, like he's saying, hitting high on the paddle is not necessarily
I missed that part.
On the sweet spot, but is it
leverage?
Yeah, leverage. So he's asking, is it an issue of more like paddle head speed?
Yeah, so it's just a multifaceted question. I missed that part. Yeah, leverage too is a big thing, right? I mean, because because you could pretend that it's all just one slab of EPP foam.
Right.
Like if you hit near the top of the paddle, just because of the leverage and the torque that you're generating, you should be able to get more power there than if you hit at the bottom. So that is it's a good question.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it is more beneficial to hit overheads as high on the paddle face as possible, because you're getting the maximum paddle speed and the maximum leverage, right? And why Callum Dawson had a hard time putting the balls away, right, with overheads, because he's got very little leverage holding it like a ping pong paddle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it helped him in some ways. I mean, that guy wouldn't miss a dink.
Oh my God!
Because he was so connected
hand
to
speed,
his
right? Yeah. All right. Next question from PBA Today. Is it ideal to serve hitting the sweet spot every time, or more so the upper edge, even if it's more of a dead spot for whip and topspin? This is very similar to what we just discussed. Is there especially for a wide body paddle any viable shot where it's better to hit outside the sweet spot?
That's it's an interesting question too, because I'm not actually doing this stuff on purpose. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, like with the overhead, like you said, it's better to hit near the top of the paddle, and it definitely is. But I don't do it on purpose. It's just a product of what I'm doing.
Right.
So would I say I honestly, from now putting my coach hat on, being a coach, I would say really just try to hit the ball. You don't want to think about the spot on the paddle that you're hitting it, because that can really mess you up. I think naturally you're going to hit the right spot if you have the right technique.
Yeah.
But I mean, just like kind of, and you can expand on this too, I'm sure. It's the same as the previous question, and just that if you're hitting near the top of the paddle, you have a little more leverage, you have a little more torque, and then naturally it's something that happens because you're letting a ball drop when you serve. You just toss it, drop it, and then it's on its way down as you make contact.
Right.
So you're just more likely to hit it near the top of the paddle than the bottom.
For sure. So no, all good stuff. Next question, Ali Johnny asks, do you guys recommend looking for a paddle to shore up a weakness or one that plays into existing strengths?
Okay, I can go first.
Yeah,
we both really have. So I actually think that for me, I found that it's better to play to a paddle that shores up existing weaknesses.
Okay.
And I know this is interesting. I mean, I think for me personally, playing to your strengths is good, but I think that your strengths are always going to improve because those are the shots that you're going to hit the most often in a game. Like for me, when I was using the Power Air, I was using a paddle that was kind of playing to my strengths because my strengths were aggressive play and flicking the ball, and my weaknesses were resetting and playing defense. With a Power Air, it's the same. It's super tough to reset, but you can flick and you can be aggressive. So I was playing to my strengths, but I actually think that kind of long term had some issues for me, created some issues just because I never even wanted to really practice resetting, and I was never really confident. I never really developed confidence in hitting resets because it's just so tough with that paddle, and it was already a weakness of mine. Right. So I think your strengths will naturally get better because you're always looking for those shots in the game. You're always trying to, I'm always trying to flick the ball, and it's probably easier actually to hit a flick with a Power Air than it is with a really dwelly paddle. For me personally, with a ton of dwell, and dwell time and flick are two different things.
Right.
Flick is a flick.
Right. Right.
So but I'll still hit a good flick.
Right.
So I think it's but it's a nuanced question. I mean, you might disagree.
No, I tend to agree. I love this question too. It comes like kind of perennially, but I can go either way on this. I totally get your point, and I think that's probably the better point, that you kind of shore up your weaknesses for sure. Unless you have one strong point that is winning every game and there's no reason to work on it. But I mean, you take like the Kawamoto sisters as an example. Not that the paddle comes into this, but for the longest time they were playing to their strengths, which was defensive pickleball, right? And they became probably the best defensive players. But it wasn't winning them as many matches. But now, over the past, I feel like just like the past 6 months, they both developed an elite offensive game too. And look what happened at the last PBA. Like the Kawamoto sisters won it all. Major upsets across the entire spectrum. Are they going to continue doing that? I don't know, but they definitely worked on their weakness, which was their power game, and now they have this amazing, well-rounded game, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's probably a good analogy for the paddle scenario.
That's a great example. That was the example I would have given.
Yeah. Okay. One more question, I think. Here we are. All right.
Last question. This has been a long one. We've
It's
really
a long
gone
one,
pretty
like
deep
2 hours at least, right? All right. Last question is from user Quackerman. What would be the use of an elongated paddle if the sweet spot is more central in the middle of the face? Seems counterintuitive. For example, being the body flicks An example being the Body Helix Flick F1 with the fiberglass directly in the center of the paddle. It says, James also mentioned foam having more of a centered sweet spot as opposed to Gen 3 designs. So that you generate a lot of buzz with your kind of sweet spot location talk on the previous podcast. So again, what's the core of this question? What would be the use of an elongated paddle with a more central sweet spot?
Yep. Because these questions have so many parts of them that I forget part of it.
I know, me too.
I'll ask the most recent one, answer the most recent part first, which is that, so not all full foam paddles will have a more central sweet spot. Right. I think I kind of, so the paddles that I had used, for example, the Boomstick, which has EPP foam in the core, it actually has honeycomb in the grip handle, and then it's fully encompassed with EVA foam. So a paddle like that, I personally felt had a more central sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And again, like I haven't done testing on it, but I felt like it had a more central sweet spot. But then, for example, if you had a diving board style of foam, except you just had EPP, let's take the Pro 4, for example, and just swap out honeycomb with EPP, then that, sweet spot might be a little higher. Yeah. So it's not necessarily a black or white thing, but I think so. Then to answer the first part of the question, which is an elongated paddle. So an elongated paddle that has a more centralized sweet spot. Well, still at the end of the day, if you make contact even at the 2-inch impact location on an elongated paddle, you're going to generate some good power because of the torque and the leverage that you have. Right. So I think it actually, I think it's okay. I mean, there's just different use cases for different people. Mm-hmm. If you're somebody that's not super flicky with your shots and you like to let the ball bounce, but you also like to finish the point with overheads, just because you're using an elongated paddle that has a more centrally located sweet spot doesn't mean you can't finish an overhead away. Right. Like for me personally, I feel like I can put the ball away with a Gen 1 paddle. Mm-hmm. So it would be okay with an elongated paddle if it was, kind of tuned up to be centrally located in the sweet spot, because if I make contact, at that 2-inch impact location, for example, there's a ton of leverage to work with. You can still finish the point.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it also comes back to our discussion of the two components of sweet spot, one being the kind of objective, how hot the ball comes off the face, and the other, like the biomechanical vibration frequency one. I think it's going to rarely do you get a paddle that is actually, the sweet spot is actually dead center in terms of how it feels good to hit the paddle there. Yep. Normally it's up around a 4-inch from the top location. And it's going to be a combination of both. Like when you're swinging it for an overhead put away, you need to feel like it's feeling pretty good to hit it in that location. So that relates to the vibration frequencies. And there needs to be some pretty good response off the tip of the paddle, Yep. So yes, some paddles are very dead up top, some of the Gen 1 paddles, have a dead spot, pretty severe dead spot up top, versus the thermoformed and other Gen paddles that is expanded. But yeah, then it comes down to where it feels good to hit the ball. And the shape of the paddle relates to that. So you like the Agassi shape from Miola because it appeals to our tennis instincts of hitting further up on the paddle face, because it is tapered and it pushes that vibration node up, to where it feels better to hit it closer to the head of the paddle.
Yeah, and this is a question for you, John, actually, because I've been experimenting with these paddles. I have personally felt, and I could be totally wrong on this because there's the placebo effect, and if I'm the only guy testing it, there's room for it. But I found that paddles that have the Franklin-style surface layout, so for those of us at home, a Pro 4, for example, we'll go Pro 4 versus Franklin C45. Right. A Pro 4 has 3 layers of carbon fiber, and it's 0 by 90 by 0 degrees. Right. And then you have the Franklin-style, which is 0, 45, 135, and 90. It's 4 layers. Okay. It's 4 layers, and it's. I know that the 4 layers are in some, I don't know which order they're laid out in, but it's 0, 45, 90, and 135. Okay. Wow. So then my question is, having those biased layups, do you feel like, because from what I've been told, that should push the sweet spot up a little bit? But I'm asking you. I don't know. Yeah. Do you think so?
I never thought about like the orientation of the carbon fiber layup or any materials layup, whether or not that would affect the vibration nodes. I'm sure it would. I just don't know which direction it would push it. Yeah.
I feel like, I personally feel like it pushes it up a little. Yeah. But maybe we should do some PBCOR testing and see,
For sure. You've got a prototype here that is.
I have a prototype that's got that surface layout. Okay. Yeah. We might make that the RPM 135, we might call it.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Awesome. Yeah.
It was a long one, guys.
Good God. Yeah. I was like, we need
felt like an
2
hour.
more cups of coffee.
It felt pretty short. But thank you for having me on, by the way. I really
thanks for coming. I really appreciate you traveling here because, like I said, it's much more compelling, I think, to have content where we're sitting across from each other. Great to get to know you a little bit while you've been here, too. Love to have more visits. Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. Maybe next time I'll come when it's not pouring rain outside. This first time in Denver. So
sounds good, James. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.